at 6:31. And we have one, why don't we just call the roll?
Sure.
Please.
President McKeag,
Here.
Trustee Backhorst. I know she was here just a minute ago. Eric Kudo,
Here.
Barbara Kylie Miller,
Here.
Therese Klein,
Here.
Josh Pollock,
Here.
and Dan Wicklund.
Here.
Great. Thank you very much. Our next item of business is to approve the August 24th, 2021 meeting minutes. Is there a motion to approve?
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes of August 24th.
And I'll second.
Great. Motion by Commissioner Kylie Miller, seconded by Commissioner Wicklund. Is there any discussion?
Not really. I sent a couple of
Here
little
I am.
typos to Crystal, but nothing worth discussing.
Great. Hearing none. All those in favor, show of hands. Aye.
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 Okay. Any opposed? No. Minutes are adopted as presented. Next item for agenda or on the agenda is consideration of a parking special exception for a proposed multifamily. I'm sorry, it's cut off.
Redevelopment.
Multifamily redevelopment at 4414 North Oakland Avenue, submitted by Acquisition Entity 5 LLC, Wimmer Communities. So we will, as agenda, we'll have the overview of the presentation and the application. Then we'll open it for public comment, and then we'll have Plan Commission deliberation. So at this point, I'll hand it over to Bart to introduce the item.
All right, thank you. I'm just going to share my screen and give a brief presentation that matches the memo within your packet.
Actually, President McKeag, I have a point of order.
Yes.
So I've been contacted by a number of village residents regarding the composition of the Plan Commission, specifically the trustee position. From what I can tell, based on village code, the appointed trustee is supposed to be confirmed by a vote of the village board for their appointment. And from what I've been told, that hasn't happened. I went back through the records to look to see if a vote was ever taken on the appointment of Trustee Backhorst, and I could not find that as well. So I told the folks that I would bring it up. I don't have an opinion one way or the other, but I thought we should get a ruling from you as the chair or from Nathan, the attorney, about moving forward.
Well, I think that in the future, if you have something that's not agended, it would be great to put it in writing ahead of time so that we can be prepared. So at this point, we will proceed with the meeting as agended, and we can follow up on that.
Actually, I'd like to appeal the ruling of the chair. If there's a member of the commission that is not a sitting member of the commission, then not only should Trustee Backhorst not be here, but Trustee Stokebrand should still be a member of the Plan Commission. And as such, I don't know how we would move forward without her participation.
Well, we have a quorum of the Plan Commission. You are challenging my decision to move forward with the agenda.
I mean, I have no problem with your position to move forward with the agenda. I just want to make sure that I'm challenging the composition of the Plan Commission.
Okay. I would recommend that you submit that in writing, and then we can have a ruling on it. But it's not going to happen.
That's not something that, so the ruling that you've made, I have appealed, and that ruling needs to be voted on by the commission. That's not something that you can overrule me on.
Well played.
It's not a play, it's Robert's rules.
So I will repeat. Attorney Bear, so let me get this straight, Commissioner Kudo. You are asking for a ruling on the composition of the commission before we take the item number 3.
Based on village code that I read,
Commissioner Kudo, all I need you to do is clarify what you're asking at this time.
that's exactly what I'm asking.
So you're making a motion. You are making a
No.
motion. No?
I'm not making a motion. I'm appealing your ruling.
Okay. The ruling being appointing trustee Backhorst to the commission?
No, not at all. I have no business appealing that ruling. The ruling is whether or not you can set aside my point of order.
Well, there's really no point of order. If you want to raise that issue, under 155 of the village code and Robert's rules, it's always it's always in order for someone to move to adjourn. So if you believe that there's something wrong with proceeding with the meeting, you can move to adjourn and see if anyone joins in that. And if not, we'll move on with the meeting. But I have no clue whether or not we're not going to address an appointment as a rule of order at the beginning of a meeting. Nobody has normally when those types of appointments are addressed by the full board, they're placed on the consent agenda at some point during a meeting, if that is the procedure by which the appointment is made and it's part of the consent agenda. I don't have all of we're not going to get in at this point to whether or not we're not going to dig through the consent agendas from the last 2 or 3 or 4 months or whatever it is of the board meetings to find out whether it's in there or not and dig through the ordinances. If you believe that the meeting should move forward, you can move to adjourn. Otherwise, we're going to move on with the meeting. If there's no second and if there's no majority vote to adjourn, we'll move forward with the meeting.
So the appeal would require a second. Yes. Yeah.
Well, I don't think it's an appeal. There's no ruling being made by the chair right now. She's just moving forward with the agenda as agendized and noticed. But
how would we move forward with
move to adjourn
voting?
If you believe that moving forward or the body moving forward would be improper, move to adjourn and see if you have any support.
But why would we have to move to adjourn?
Well,
that's my opinion. So you can either do that or not.
Yeah, so basically, Commissioner Kudo, we are going to proceed with item 3. At this time, you can submit your appeal in writing and we will respond to it upon conference with the council.
But this is a point of order that I have appealed.
Then move to adjourn and see if you have any support. Otherwise, we move on with the agenda.
No,
this is not. It's not agendized tonight to take up issues concerning appointments or challenges.
But a point of order doesn't need to be agendized, and the point of order
that, in my opinion, is far beyond a point of order. A point of order is, how do we take the votes on that? Is there division? If there was a voice vote, should we move forward with taking a poll or having the votes recorded in a different way, or I couldn't hear so and so, or is someone out of order by speaking? This is, in my opinion, far beyond a point of order.
But the rules require, because the ruling's already been ruled on by the chair, the rules require that I would get a second on my hold on.
You can do whatever you want. My advice to the body is you either move on with the agenda or Commissioner Kudo, you move to adjourn. And then if there's a second, there'll be discussion and you can explain that the reason I believe we need to adjourn is I think there's an issue with respect to the appointment of 1 or more members. And perhaps this isn't the proper way to move forward. And then the body can, vote on that. But otherwise, my advice is we move on with the agenda, and that's all I'm going to say on it.
So, Commissioner, I'm going to go with Attorney Bear's advice, and I'm moving on. And if you continue to speak on this, then I will say point of order for your speaking. So I'm going to hand it back over to Director Griepentrag to make the presentation.
Thank you, President McKeag. So before us tonight, we have an application. And slides aren't moving. Sorry about that. Thank you, President McKeag. So before us tonight, we have an application for consideration of a special parking special exception for proposed multifamily redevelopment at 4414 North Oakland Avenue. On July 15th, 2021, Nick Wimmer of Wimmer Communities, doing business as Acquisition Entity 5 LLC, submitted a special exception application for consideration by the Plan Commission for a reduction in total and enclosed parking requirements associated with a potential multifamily redevelopment to be located at 4414 North Oakland Avenue. This parcel, which is most presently occupied as a North Shore Bank office building with a drive-through and parking lot, is zoned B2, mixed-use residential district. The proposed redevelopment would demolish the existing structure and construct a 4-story, 43-unit multifamily building. Multifamily units on all floors are permitted use in the B2 district. Per 535-47A2, multifamily buildings in the B1 through B4 district require 1.75 parking spaces per dwelling unit. The zoning code also specifically states that all required parking for multifamily dwellings, except guest parking, shall be provided in an approved garage. Based on the projected 43 units, 76 parking spaces would be required. The current proposal includes 44 total spaces, of which 30 are fully enclosed underground and 14 additional surface level stalls. This provision represents a ratio of 1.02 parking spaces per dwelling units. 2 additional on-street parking spaces would be created with this redevelopment through the closure of a curb cut on North Oakland Avenue. The applicant has requested an exception to the parking requirements, both quantity and enclosed spaces, and has noted that the provided parking would represent just over 1 space per unit or 0.75 spaces per bedroom. The applicant has noted that the provision of 0.75 spaces per bedroom lines up with the Institute of Transportation Engineers standards parking ratio for mid-rise multifamily developments. The building is proposed to have 27 1-bedroom units and 16 2-bedroom units for a total of 59 bedrooms. Parking would be included within the monthly rent. Materials regarding this application were noticed and shared with the Plan Commission for consideration at the July 27th, 2021 Plan Commission meeting. At that meeting, the Plan Commission voted 5-1 with Trustee Bockhorst voting no to defer consideration so that the Plan Commissioners and the community could have additional time to review the request. The applicant was not available for reconsideration at the August 24th Plan Commission meeting and requested further consideration at the September 27th Plan Commission meeting. 2 additional materials have been provided to supplement the original application: an updated traffic report and an updated special exception memo. Both materials are included within this packet, as well as 1 additional public comment that had been received since the July packet was published. Additional comments have been received since yesterday's 3 p.m. deadline and will be read into the record at a separate time. Special exception request. The applicant owns and operates approximately 5,000 housing units throughout Milwaukee and Waukesha County. They performed a parking analysis of its 4 most recent projects and found that 73% of its apartment units have 1 vehicle. They also noted that those developments do not have the same access to transit or walkable, bikeable neighborhoods as this development would. Lastly, they also included that the prospective residents place a high value on the specific parking needs and discriminate against communities that do not fit their needs. With respect to other matters, the applicant references recent trends and comprehension of how minimum parking standards impact communities, particularly in areas with available alternate transportation. They suggest that minimum parking requirements tend to have an adverse effect on neighborhood as they promote more cars and congestion on the road and less use of public transportation. They further note a May 2021 essay that argues when municipalities establish minimum parking requirements, it leads to more vehicles on the road and less housing and less of everything that makes urbanity worthwhile. Complete details of the request and the proposed redevelopment may be found in the application materials. Of specific note, responses to each of the 13 factors of consideration have been detailed within the appendix in a letter dated July 16, 2021, as well as an updated memo dated September 22nd, 2021. Additionally, a traffic and parking study from June 28, 2021, which supports the applicant's assertion that the proposed parking is adequate and that there is existing capacity nearby, was performed and provided for reference. An updated traffic report performed on September 20th and 21st, while school at Lake Bluff Elementary was in session, has also been provided. The applicant also submitted a letter of opinion from Mogenberg Research that concludes a belief that the requested parking special exception will not have a negative impact on the values of the subject property, adjacent property, or neighboring properties. Sorry, I meant to advance that sooner. This is a site plan overview of the proposed redevelopment showing the proposed apartment building as well as the surface level parking spaces to the east of the development. And this is a underground floor plan of the proposed parking spaces underground. Per 535-51B, the Village Plan Commission shall consider the following as applicable prior to the granting of a special exception. There are 13 clauses that I won't read specifically into the record. They are within the memo for your reference, and they have been reviewed by the Plan Commission previous times before. With respect to staff comments, the Plan Commission has recently approved special exceptions for applicants at the following locations: Catalyst Partners 2418 through 2428 East Capitol Drive, which is presently under appeal in 2021. Fiddlehead's Coffee, 4334 North Oakland Avenue in 2020. Casa de Corazon, 4114 North Oakland Avenue in 2018. Ascension, 4027 North Oakland Avenue, 2018. Power Cycle, 4521 North Oakland Avenue, 2018. Krause Chiropractic, 2211 East Capitol Drive, 2018. North Shore Bank, 4060 North Oakland Avenue, 2016. The Ruckus, 4144 North Oakland Avenue, 2016. The BP gas station at 1604 East Capitol Drive, 2014. With respect to the most recent multifamily or mixed-use redevelopments, the following parking notes or approvals are on file. Once again, this goes through the recent history of multifamily or mixed use. So the first project of note is Catalyst Partners, which was previously mentioned at a 1 to 1.02 ratio, which is presently under appeal. The Cornerstone redevelopment at 4510 North Oakland Avenue, which is a 1 to 1.81 parking units provided. It was approved as a planned development district. The Ravenna, which has a 1 to 2 parking provision plus 16 additional spaces provided for retail. The Light Horse, which has a 1 to 1.36. It was also approved as a planned development district plus 47 parking spaces reserved in the adjacent parking garage. The Mosaic was approved at a 1 to 1.27 ratio as a planned development district plus 20 parking spaces reserved in the adjacent parking garage. And the Oaks of Shorewood, which has a 1 to 1.39 ratio, an administrative special exception was granted. With respect to available daytime on-street parking, the North Oakland Avenue and East Lake Bluff from Oakland Avenue to North Kramer Street is regulated for 2-hour daytime parking. Due to its narrow width, less than 30 feet, there is no parking on the west side of North Kramer Avenue. Parking is currently restricted on the north side of East Lake Bluff from North Kramer Street eastward during the winter months of December 1st through March 1st. However, staff is unclear why parking is fully restricted on East Lake Bluff west of North Kramer Street to North Oakland Avenue. If that were to be consistently regulated, additional on-street parking spaces could be located in the area. The village's 2020 transportation and parking analysis indicated that less than 50% of on-street parking spaces were occupied at 11 p.m. within the area, except on the east side of North Oakland Avenue from East Lake Bluff to East Kensington Boulevard, which was occupied between 50 and 69%. The provided traffic and parking study notes that North Shore Bank parking lot reserved as an off-street lot for area residents available for permitting through the village. Since the time of that study, the agreement has ceased, so off-street parking is no longer available through the village in this location. At last count, 8 cars were utilizing the lot. The owners of those vehicles and anyone else in the village are now eligible to purchase on-street permits. The study notes that most homes in the area are served by long driveways or have access to alleys with garages. The parking study notes on-street peak demand in the area occurs between 4 and 4:20 p.m. when 71% of the spaces are occupied, leaving 16 spaces available. At the latest time of the study, 7:40 p.m., it was noted that only 36% of the spaces were occupied, leaving 36 spaces available. The applicant also notes that excess on-street parking is expected during peak parking times, which may be available to residents and guests through flexible agreements and signage for surface level spaces. As noted within the application, the site is directly served by mass transit via the MCTS Green Line. Bicycle parking will also be provided within the development and is also available on street. The applicant has also indicated interest in restoring regional bike share services by sponsoring a bubbler station. And that concludes the staff overview as noted within the Planning Commission packet.
Thank you. Is the applicant present and would you like to speak?
Hello, good evening. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Great. Good evening. I'm Nick Wimmer of Wimmer Communities, 5300 South 108th Street in Hills Corners. We've just got a brief 5-minute opening statement overview before we get into the details of the project. I'm joined here tonight by Mark Wimmer, John Wimmer, Dave Wimmer, and Dave Wimmer of Wimmer Communities. And just to give you a brief introduction to who we are as a company, Wimmer Communities is a 6th-generation family business operating in real estate development, construction, and property management throughout the Milwaukee metro area. We currently own and operate about 5,000 apartment units and continue to grow with approximately 350 units under construction. We're excited to appear before you tonight to present what will be our first venture in the North Shore with the area, a 43-unit leased residential development located on the northeast corner of Oakland Avenue and Lake Bluff Boulevard. The project redevelops what has historically been a 3-lane drive-through North Shore Bank, an office building that closed and has been vacant since about 2017. The original bank structure was built in the 1960s and remained in operation until recent years. In accordance with the Village Comprehensive Plan and existing zoning code for this location, the proposal raises the site and includes a 4-story residential building with underground parking. The proposal includes 44 on-site private parking stalls to serve residents. We know there has been recent discussion amongst the Plan Commission trustees and neighbors regarding parking considerations for new developments. As we have studied the site and housing market for the community, we are confident the proposal before you will achieve the goal of adding more housing to the village without increasing the burden on traffic and parking congestion. The proposal in consideration includes a special parking exception request for a reduced number of parking stalls from the standard village parking code. As you know, many new developments of various uses come before the Plan Commission seeking the same request, largely due to the antiquated parking code still in place today. I believe it was previously stated that the current parking code was adopted in the 1950s. And then not long after, North Shore Bank was developed in the 1960s and received a special parking exemption for a reduction of 27 parking stalls for a drive-through bank use of that size. And that 27 parking stall exemption still exists today for the bank as it has for over half a century. Because we are changing the use from a bank to multifamily residential, the 27 parking stall deficiency exemption is not grandfathered into the property, so we must apply again for a parking exemption. In a sense, the proposal requests the Commission to allow for the continued use of merely the existing parking exemption that remains for over 50 years at this site to a new residential use that is far less reliant on daily traffic. We know that since the bank was built in the mid-1960s, there has not been an overburden of neighborhood or on-street parking and traffic at that location due to the 27 parking stall reduction and exemption. And we know that a 17,000 square foot 3-lane drive-through bank has a much higher vehicular presence in both parking and traffic generation than a mid-rise residential building. We are proposing a residential community that offers 1-to-1 parking stall to apartment ratio, and which guarantees every apartment unit reserved a location to park their vehicle. We look forward to continuing this discussion with you all this evening. Tammy Shishchesky is also with us as the transportation engineer and author of both of the TADDY memorandums included in your packets. Tammy, Mark, John, Dave, and I are available to answer any questions you may have regarding the study or the proposal in general, and we ask for your support. Thank you.
Thank you very much. At this time, I'd like to open public comment. We're going to ask that members of the public, you're invited to be heard during this time. At the 2-minute mark, we will ask that you wrap up your statement so that we use our time efficiently this evening. And I would suggest this format to adjust to a time allowance. And I also invite you to turn on your camera when you speak. State your name and address. State your question or your position on the application this evening, either support or oppose. And then a few sentences about to support your question or to clarify it or to clarify your position if needed. And as I said, feel free to use your camera while we speak. So at this time, I will, and I would also ask that if your comments have been submitted in writing and they are in the packet, that you allow others to speak first. And I can, if anybody is not sure who's in the packet, we have an email from Carol Parks, we have an email from Lisa Mazie, Zig Krumans, Katie Now, Don Blackmore, Cleana Draper, let's see, Christopher Bumberg, Jay Sorensen, Trustee Arndorfer, Carolyn Griffin, and Don Sorensen, I think, and Patricia Ho, or Howe, and apologies, I'm looking for the name on this one. Adam Carruthers, Mark Warer. So those names we have emails from. So at this time, I will invite members of the public to speak. If you wish to speak, please raise your hand and your emoji or unmute yourself. Okay, I see Jen.
Can I speak, or is it time for me to speak? Ann? Am I talking now? Can everyone hear me?
You are.
Okay, sorry. My name's Jennifer Essec, 2401 East Jarvis. I am calling in to say I support this project by Wimmer Properties. I feel we are an urban community, and we say we're an urban community, so let's act like an urban community and embrace developments that encourage less parking and using the public transportation. I feel if Wimmer Properties, of course, they're a business, so they're looking to make money. And if they feel they can build a property that does not require and they can find tenants that don't need or want cars, then why don't we allow them to do it? It's there can be less rent there. I mean, they will not pass the cost of the parking and the garage and all of the maintenance onto their tenants, so they can charge less rent. It's a win-win. They charge less rent, tenants get to pay less rent. We have less cars. We can continue to be the urban community that we say that we are. I support this development and the decreasing of the ratio.
Thank you, Jen. Jean?
Can you hear me?
Yes, you're welcome to use your camera.
It won't, it says you are not, this says the host has disabled my camera. Oh, there we are. Hi guys. And before I start talking and start running my 2-minute time clock, can I get something clarified first?
We'll try.
So at the last meeting, we were told it wasn't an exemption, but it was an ordinance change. And I'm a little confused.
Yes, the meeting you spoke at before was a meeting of the village board where we were considering modifications to our parking code. And one of those modifications is the parking ratio. Because that didn't pass at that meeting, this applicant is submitting an exception request to the Plan Commission. So 2 different jurisdictions.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you. Okay.
Point of parliamentary procedure, President McCullough.
Yes.
We have to ask people to state their name and address, and if they're not a resident, they can let us know and which business they own.
Okay. So guys, I'm Gene Webb. I run the cafe and bakery across the street from your proposed project. I look forward in the future to serving your residents and your renters. But my concern is that parking is, despite the numbers that were handed to us, I'm there every day. I serve an older population that needs parking. And I don't know about this 4 o'clock maximum parking, because usually I take up a lot of the parking in the neighborhood, and that's usually around lunchtime, noon, when my cafe is the busiest. So none of that seems to quite jive with kind of lived experience right in the neighborhood day to day. But I think there has to be a different solution here. It looks like you're missing 32 parking spaces. Potentially, now I know it's nice to discourage people from driving. I'm not sure it's exactly our business to do that, but 32 missing spaces is a lot in that neighborhood. I think we have to come up with something that will not negatively impact the businesses. My customers cannot ride bicycles, well, not all of them. Some of them can, but most of them, it's not unusual to see people with walkers coming into my business. This is going to create a particular hardship in this situation. It seems like it's a little too easy. It looks like the exemption is you guys want basically a 1-to-1 number, what you've planned to build and the number of units and bedrooms, et cetera. All the other listings of exemptions in the village, for the most part, are higher than that. So we're going even further than what some of those other neighborhoods in the village have gone. And I think it's too much. There are people parked there. There's been an additional request for more on-street parking from residents in the neighborhood because North Shore Bank has emptied out their lot in preparation for this sale. It's going to cause it's going to cause difficulty, whether it's a lot or a little sum. Nonetheless, it's going to have a negative impact on the businesses in the area during the day. And I really like this looked at a little more carefully. We're all here to try to provide service and to make a profit. We're all doing the same thing with the exception of Village Hall. So I think we have to be a little more sensitive to what's happening. I know it's nice to discourage driving.
If you could wrap up, Mr. Webb, if you could wrap up your comment, please.
I'm wrapped up. That's it. This is further than what we've gone with other exemptions. And it does not meet with what village residents have said in polling that we've done and polling that the village has done. So it looks like it's not as clean as you're presenting it. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay. Elizabeth Beagley.
Hello. Hi, my name's Elizabeth Beagley. I live at 2413 East Shorewood Boulevard in Shorewood, Wisconsin. I am a city planner and my training was actually in current planning. That's what I spent my first 8 years of work doing in the city of Portland, Oregon, where we were one of the first pioneers of this type of thought process where we're moving towards less parking. We were one of the first jurisdictions with an incredibly strong infrastructure of light rail, which was coming on when I was working there, as well as bus system that was very well utilized. If you look at what's happened 15 years after we started these reductions in planning of parking spaces, you will see that the entire community of Portland, Oregon has changed, and it's hardly livable in the areas where we have maximum density. You cannot park within blocks of where the commercial spaces are in high density areas because we took away the requirement for parking. As we're looking at how we want our village to grow and what's good for our village, we really need to keep in mind first, what it's going to do to our commercial buildings. Do we want these buildings to be there? Do we want to have to walk 2 to 4 blocks, if not 5 blocks, to actually go to a bakery or go to a bar? It's already very hard to find parking, and people will not come from other areas to use our commercial spaces if we take away all parking. Second, we have to look at what's going to happen 10 to 15 years down the road as more and more buildings keep asking for these exceptions. And we've already made this this happen. So when do we say no? Actually, this doesn't work because we've already ruined the area for these other projects. We have to really look at what we're doing. And finally, I really want you to spend time studying what we've learned, lessons learned from areas like Portland, Seattle, Minnesota. What are the lessons learned in those areas? Most of them aren't very positive for what has happened to our small town, our large towns. This is a small town. I wanted to keep it a small town feeling. That's why we moved here. I love development. The development just
Can
needs
you
to
please
be-
wrap up? I ask you to wrap up your comments.
Sure. I mean, I think we need to actually hear more from people who have new things to say versus less, but I understand President McCaig that we want to wrap up, but the truth is people have information that's paramount. We need to hear it. You know, 2 minutes is short when we allowed 5 to 10 minutes for other people. But I do also believe one last thing, and I will let go. We need to make sure we have these comments after the president and the commissioners speak, because we learn things through them. And first of all, we might support this project more, hearing what they say. But I think all of our public comments should be after everyone speaks. So it's also the last thoughts on people's minds, because this is what you're working for us. We've voted you in. I actually supported.
Point of order, President McCaig. We can add all of these to items of future consideration. These are great suggestions, Ms. Beagley, but can we add these where they're appropriately scheduled for our business meeting? Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. We have Dan Walsh.
Thank you, President McKay. My name is Daniel Walsh. I live at 4024 North Stowell Avenue. We have been sort of working around this issue since February of last year at Stowell and Capitol. This very, very same issues come up, and I'll keep it very short. The people that live here, the people who are on this call, the people that we've talked to, the residents of Shorewood love the village of Shorewood. And they love the village of Shorewood for what it is. It's the most densely populated community in all of Wisconsin. What we're talking about here is not a mere exception. We're not talking about, well, we're just over the limit. We're going to give you 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 even more parking stalls. We're talking about making an exception that is 40% less than what the current zoning requires. The current zoning is what led to what we have here in this village. So the idea somehow that this is just an exception, I think is a little bit ludicrous. What's really happening is you're externalizing the costs. The developers and the Wimmers are a fabulous company, stellar reputation, no problems with them as a company. I'm sure they could do a great development here, but the proposed project is much more dense and externalizes many more costs onto the immediate neighborhood. The thing that I think the Plan Commission should consider right now is that this expansion of entitlement that they're going to vote on tonight is right now at the level of the village board. In this process, the Plan Commission and Trustee Bockhorst and President McCaig have tried to push a rezoning of the property to make this decision codified, but it didn't pass at the village board. It's still being considered at the village board. The idea that you, a Plan Commission, could overturn what the village board is considering is ludicrous. This is like you are trying to actually rezone the property with this decision when it is a current matter pending in front of the village board. I think that you should all vote no, and you should let the village board make this decision with the input of much more of the community, many, many more people who are interested. That's all I have to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you. John Krause.
Was muted. Hello. Am I being heard?
Yes, we
Yep,
can
we
hear
can
you.
hear you.
Great. John Krause, I live at 1711 East Lake Bluff Boulevard. Pretty sure I'm the closest person to this location that's speaking this evening. Pretty short. I'm in favor of the development. I'm in favor of the reduced parking requirement. Pretty much don't agree with anything anyone else has said against that. Including the planner that was speaking earlier. I'm not sure that we want to really be comparing ourselves to places like Portland and other large cities. But that being said, I do think that there is definitely a move towards this direction, and I'm in favor of it. And I'm not going to get into all the reasons why, but for the Planning Commission's purposes, just thought you would want to know that someone who lives about 200 feet from this development has no problem with the proposed parking reduction. Thanks.
Thank you. Lisa.
Hi, thank you. Lisa Castanozzi. My business is at 4451 North Oakland, and I live also nearby. And I just am concerned as a business owner on this block that any decrease in public parking spaces will affect really the whole neighborhood. It's already difficult for customers to park here. I hear it all the time. People tell me, you know, I'd like to stop by your store. I usually can't find street parking. You know, it could be weeks before someone comes in. I mean, some people can't walk that far. They have to park near the businesses. So I think it affects all of us. And the proposal, I look forward to a new development. I think that's a good thing. I wish it had more apartments for lower income residents. I think that's really what Shorewood is looking for. But I am, you know, for development and new apartments. I think that's great. Going to one parking spot per resident is going to affect the neighborhood and the businesses and the residents that park here and the visitors from other communities like Whitefish Bay who come in. So the less parking we have available for the public, it impacts everyone and the village. So I just want to state that, and thank you for your time.
Thank you, Lisa. Let's see, Lisa Mazie. Lisa Mazie.
Sorry. Hi. Can you hear me? Great. You can probably guess that I'm not Lisa Mazie, but I live at 1816 East Lake Bluff. Lisa Mazie is my partner. We live directly across the alley from the bank building, and a lot has been said. Lisa has provided written comments, so I won't go back over that. I would just like to add a point that has not yet been raised. Because I live on the north side of East Lake Bluff on the block that we're talking about. And I think I've heard that the proposal is to add parking in an area that currently has no parking on the north side of that street. And I would just like to point out that when school is going in and coming out, there is a tremendous amount of student traffic on East Lake Bluff. It's like a major thoroughfare because there's a light there at Oakland, and it's like quite a thoroughfare for pedestrian traffic, but not only pedestrians, kids on scooters, kids on bicycles, kids on skateboards are going through there. And adding parking on the north side of the street will effectively narrow the part of the street that's available for all of that traffic and increase the risk of an accident between a car and a vulnerable road user like a student on a bicycle, a skateboard, or a scooter. So just want to point out that there's also a public safety component to effectively narrowing East Lake Bluff and increasing the visual clutter for drivers moving on East Lake Bluff. So that's the end of my comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Point of clarification, in the proposal, are those spaces added to a no parking area?
No, I believe he's referring to my staff comment with respect to review of existing on-street parking. I simply pointed out that area is not congruent with the rest of the street. This proposal does not recommend changing that. If that were to be changed, it would be an action of the village board, but that has not been requested by the developer, nor has staff suggested that it will take place. It was simply a point of clarification with respect to my observations when I was in the area.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for raising that question and observation. Vera Brandt.
Hey, it's actually Andrea Brandt. Vera's my daughter. I just couldn't change it on here. I live at 4054 North Stowell. And I guess my concern is I'm not necessarily opposed to a development. I just do think we need to take a little bit of a deeper dive into these developments and try and make some compromise with those who agree with it and those who don't. Listening to the comments as far, it's pretty much 50-50. So I feel like there's middle ground to be had, which would be nice if we could meet that. One thing that I think we need to look at, and I couldn't zoom in on my device enough in my computer to see like the layout, but you know, with less parking, we're going to have more services that are going to come in. People are going to utilize Amazon more. They're going to utilize takeout more. Just because you don't have a car doesn't mean you don't appreciate the conveniences that life offers us today. So I do think I want to make sure like that stuff is accounted for, that there's space for that parking so that that's not taking up spaces on the street, that they account for that in some alleyway or an extra cutout. Just something to accommodate that kind of traffic that would obstruct spaces and potentially create traffic issues. So I think we need to look at things like that. I do think that the unit in general seems just a little bit too large for the area. Like if it were a little bit smaller, could accommodate a little bit more parking, I think it would be something that more people would support and be in agreement with. Like there's got to be some compromise where the developer still makes profit and more residents are happy. And I'm just looking to see more compromise from the board and not just taking a plan and running with it without asking for changes to be made and looking at what could be best for our community. Because I think if, you know, everybody hears out each other better than the way it currently is, that we could come up with a lot of good compromise. Like one thing I was thinking about is what if near crosswalks where we already have the ramps, that there were, you know, reserved like handicap areas. I know that on Lincoln Memorial Drive, that's something that's recently instituted. And I was just thinking that could be something that could help solve some of these issues. So I do think as a board and a plan commission that we do need to work on working together better and making more compromises. So that is the message I want to leave.
Thank you, Andrea. And I owe you a response. You wanted to get together and it completely fell off my radar. I apologize about that. So I owe you an email. Bruce Hoover.
Hi, yes, my name is Bruce Hoover. I live at 4411 North Kramer Street. I am, my garage and my driveway actually empty directly into the bank parking lot there in the alley. And I for one, thank you for proposing this, and I appreciate some new construction and new property in Shorewood. The site of the bank has been an eyesore for years since they moved out, and I've lived here for a decade. One thing I have noticed in my time here is an uptick in traffic, even from fiddleheads. So I see additional traffic on Kramer Street as well as Lake Bluff. And I'm okay with it. It's part of progress. I understand that. But if there are any kind of proposals to redo parking along Kramer Street or Lake Bluff, I would have to definitely voice my opinion against Kramer Street is already narrow enough and people drive through here like, well, a little excessive at times, but I've actually had to put up a 6-foot fence on the front and the back side of my property to keep people from walking through. So that's part of the nature of parking too, is that people are going to be parking elsewhere besides on the property. That's going to, people cut through other people's property all the time. So I guess I'm in support of it, but I think I agree with the previous people that have talked, that I think there needs to be a little bit more of a compromise, maybe a little bit more of an understanding of additional parking would be a nice thing to have. So that's all I've got. Thank you very much for allowing me to speak.
Of course. Thank you, Bruce. Karen Desing? Karen, would you like to speak?
Sure. I'm sorry, just unmuting myself again here. Can you hear me? Thanks, Ann. I am Karen Deasy and I live at 3952 North Stoll Avenue. Thank you again for letting us speak about this. Just wanted to make just a very brief note, and this is consistent with the development, I guess that's on Capitol Drive, is that I would like the Planning Commission, and I appreciate that the Planning Commission wants to bring in development for all of us so that it increases our tax base. However, I would like you to be thoughtful and really think about how it affects the current tax base, all the buildings, businesses that we have here. Just like the individual had spoken a little bit earlier about her business on Oakland Avenue and concerned about people being able to get to her existing business. We don't want to provide, this wonderful new development at the detriment not only of those businesses, but also the surrounding homeowners, because we do want to consider all the things that make Shorewood the wonderful place it is, the safety, the beautiful housing, making this a destination for many people to come to. So just keep that in mind when you are approving this and or not approving it, and really thinking about the parking really has an impact on not just the future tax base, but the existing tax base. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Okay, is there any other members of the public who would like to speak? I don't see any hands. Jim?
Hey, thanks. I'll make this real quick. Jim Arndorfer, 2524 East Shore Boulevard. I appreciate all the public input tonight. I do understand wanting to keep meetings efficient. I do, however, think that holding citizen comment to 2 minutes is probably overly restrictive and would, maybe encourage expanding it to 3 minutes. Small thing, but it's more than 60 seconds in reality and composing thoughts. I say this as someone who has, watched some of the trustees here talk at extensive length, either in their roles as trustees or as private citizens in other forums. So I think we owe that to other participants. Thank you.
Okay. Jim, and I would welcome you to send that feedback to me ahead of meetings too. But in practice, people have been speaking closer to 3 minutes this evening. So thank you. Luke Delaney.
Hi, my name's Luke. I live about 3 blocks south of the property. Just wanted to speak out in support of the development in general. I lived in Shorewood for about 8 years, and one of the things that's been great here over that time has been seeing the progress, especially in the downtown area, but generally on Capitol and Oakland. So, I know this group will deliberate, carefully on the parking exception and the details of that and how it will impact, especially the local neighbors. But in general, just been impressed over this time of how we've been able to grow both the number of units of housing here as well as, all of the buildings along Capitol and Oakland. So looking forward to you debating that and deliberating it carefully. But in general, it's been great to see the progress and the growth of development in Shorewood during this time.
Thank you, Luke. Anyone else? Okay. I will close public comment at 7:27.
Would you like me to read? I did receive additional emails after the posted deadline. So I'll be happy to read those into the record.
Yes,
as a
please.
reminder to those on the call and anyone else that you can share this with, I do include written public comment received prior or 3 p.m. the day before. And so I have added those to the packet. Those are already in there, as President McKeag mentioned. I have received additional comments since then to my email, so I'd be happy to read those in, just starting from the most recent, and I'll go through. I think I have 7 of them in total. The first one is from Elizabeth Muslin at 4349 North Alpine Avenue. Please make it known that we are against the parking exception that does not follow the existing zoning regulation of 1.75 cars per unit. Developers should be obligated to provide sufficient parking so that residents of Shorewood, already the densest community in the state, are not further burdened with parking issues. The next comment comes from Desti Larino at no address provided. Good morning, Bart. I wanted to share my opinion on the proposal to allow for fewer parking spaces for the proposed apartments on Lake Bluff in Oakland. I feel the developer should be required to have 2 spaces per unit. Anything less will create a burden on the current residents. Not only do I feel it will cause more traffic congestion, but it will create a safety hazard as a result. This is a major crosswalk for children and adults, and pedestrian safety is a concern. Automobile safety is also a concern, as Lake Bluff was not intended to accommodate any more traffic. As far as the building is concerned, it is a compromise and doesn't fit the master plan for new housing in the village. It doesn't solve any future problems and will add more rental units to a market that will not absorb more high-priced rental units. The developer's outline is off target and in time will become a burden to the village and not an asset. Our open spaces are very valuable, and this is not the highest and best use. I prefer to see condominiums. They will generate more revenue for the village and property taxes and give the current residents housing options. I've served on the board of review for 9 years, and we have never saw the level of compromises the current developers are asking for. We were dealing with shortages of 2 to 5 spaces, not 30 or 40. This is unprecedented and should not be considered. We must deal with this here and now, not some idealistic vision. If cars do become obsolete, those spaces could be repurposed, but no, if they don't exist. Thanks for taking the time to hear me out. This is a very important topic, and compromising the parking at this level is not prudent, so please share my opinion. The next comment comes from David Amenta, no address provided. Hi, Bart, please forward this to the plan. One second. Hi, Bart, please forward this to the Plan Commission and Village Board. To the Plan Commission, this is to oppose granting of a parking exception for the proposed development at Lake Bluff and Oakland. Those of you who have lived for more than 7 years in Shorewood will know that controversies around development issues have been extremely divisive for our community. It doesn't have to be this way. In fact, the comprehensive plan lays out a process for community involvement. The first strategic direction of the comprehensive plan is to ensure redevelopment on Capitol and Oakland meets community goals. Under that goal is the advice to be willing to wait for the desired development project that meets community goals. You adopted this plan in the strategic direction, so why are you now considering a second development project which does not meet any community goals? Housing for people earning over $75,000 a year is not furthering affordable housing goals, is not assisting in housing for disabled adults, or housing for seniors who would like to stay in Shorewood after living here for most of their lives. Development for development's sake is not a community goal. It is not moving Shorewood further in terms of equity or diversity. I know that many of you feel that density for its own sake is a good thing for environmental or other reasons. I think that staff shares this view and has encouraged you to approve this development. You should know that village staff, with one exception, Tyler Burkhart, do not live in Shorewood and do not have a stake in the development of our community. Their role is to give unbiased information and to leave the politics to community leaders. That hasn't happened in this case, which is both surprising and disappointing. But whatever you or Bart believe, your role is not to promote your personal beliefs, but to act in the best interest of the community. That means listening to the comprehensive plan and initiating a broad public process, develop form-based zoning before approving yet another luxury housing project in Shorewood. Thanks for your work on the Plan Commission. The next email is from Emily Gallagher, no address provided. Hello, please make it known that I am against the parking exception. I disagree with moving forward with the condo development without following the zoning regulation in place that calls for 1.75 cars per unit. I support development that takes into account our residents' concerns and village regulations. I would like to see a plan that provides adequate parking solutions that align with our needs and regulations. Thank you, Emily. This next one is from Callie Spheris and Joseph Conti at 4041 North Downer Avenue. Dear Mr. Griepentrog, please make it known that we are against the parking exception that does not follow the existing zoning regulation of 1.75 cars per unit. Developers should be obligated to provide sufficient parking so that residents of Shorewood, already the densest community in the state, are not further burdened with parking issues. Thank you for your consideration of this issue. This next one is from Elizabeth Sutherland and Conrad Silverberg at 4225 North Prospects Avenue. Hello, as residents of Shorewood, we are concerned over the Wimmer Properties plan for several reasons. One, the cost of the apartments does not jibe with Shorewood goal to provide affordable housing. Two, the additional street parking needed for the project, approximately 20 spaces, puts additional stress on the parking situation in Shorewood and also adversely affects the businesses along Oakland Avenue. Three, instead I support the goals of the housing study and the comprehensive plan. Unless Wimmer can create a plan that provides 100% parking for the residents and apartments that meet the needs of our seniors and lower income residents, we cannot support this project. Additionally, we will be adding to an already difficult parking situation in Shorewood. And lastly, there is a comment from Sam Essec at 2401 East Jarvis. And please share my email with the Village Board and Plan Commission. I am writing to express support for a lower parking ratio for the proposed development on the corner of Oakland and Lake Bluff. I believe an exemption from the current excessively high ratios is justified. The attached photo is a great example of the excessive amount of available parking in Shorewood. I needed a place to take a photo of a car that I'm selling, and the top of the parking lot at the Metro Market was completely empty. So was the floor below it. This photo was taken on Saturday at noon. This was the time when Metro Market was full of people, but we still had excessive parking. High parking ratio requirements translate into higher costs for developers, which translate into higher rent for tenants. When a building costs more to build, the rents will be higher. There is no escaping that. It is real estate economics 101. I have a master's degree from UW-Madison in real estate and urban economics and have done financial models for these types of projects. I understand how parking costs translate to rents. High parking ratios make it harder to have affordable housing. There is no escaping this fact. So be clear that a vote requiring more parking is a vote against affordable housing. In addition to higher rents, more parking is bad for the environment. It encourages more auto use, creates less surface area for water infiltration, which contributes to flooding. It ultimately contributes to a global warming with more fossil fuel burning and more concrete surfaces on the planet. I also have a master's degree in environmental studies, and these are documented relationships. You may feel that suggesting a relationship between parking ratios and global warming is ridiculous, but I do not. We all must contribute in whatever way we can to reducing global warming, and your vote counts. Please don't encourage more parking structures and more cars. Vote for projects that promote alternative forms of transportation and shared vehicles that will help reduce global warming even in the smallest way. The impact of global climate change might include more intense storms, and we will feel the impact of that climate change in Wisconsin. More paved surfaces means less land for water infiltration. More underground parking means less room in the aquifer to hold water. Being close to Lake Michigan and the Milwaukee River means our aquifer can be saturated at times of heavy rain. Please don't encourage excessive concrete or underbuilding parking to reduce the region's ability to hold water without flooding. Our roads already exist. Encourage people to park there. Consider the public benefit of taxing users for the services they use, like parking on our streets. Charge for street parking permits so the users pay for our roads and people who don't drive pay less of that burden. It seems fairer to me. Some people choose to share vehicles or live without a car. That is a fact. It really is true that some people share cars or live without them. I know that it's hard for some of my neighbors to believe, but it is true. I was one of those people for many years. My adult children are now those people as well. people who share cars or don't have them should benefit from lower rents and not have to pay as much for the roads we drive on. Lower rents are good for Shorewood. Let's be progressive in Shorewood and allow developers to price their buildings to the market they want to attract. Let the developer take the risk of finding tenants that are comfortable with parking ratios they build for. Let's not dictate or regulate the requirements that result in higher rents and are bad for the environment. We can be better than that. We can be better than that in Shorewood. Let's not be the neighbors that say it's okay for the city, but I don't want it on my street. We can make this work, and we can have a safe street for walking and biking with lower parking ratios that require street parking. It is possible. Thank you. And that is the additional comments that I've received to the time of the meeting.
Thank you. Is there anyone else in the meeting that would like to speak? Members of the public? Okay, with that, I will close the public comment for this evening at 7:37, at which time we can move on to Plan Commission deliberation. Similar to the last parking exception that we reviewed, I will go through each of the 13 factors. We will determine whether it's applicable, and then you can we'll go around and see what comments in support of the finding or not. Can I finish, Commissioner Kylie Miller? Thanks. I sent out an email saying that we would try to avoid repeating ourselves. So basically, I'm not trying to limit deliberation or discussion amongst the plan commissioners. What I'm trying to avoid is us repeating ourselves and not being efficient with our time. So this shouldn't be, I don't think it'll be a big change. Also, if for some reason the 2-minute time allowance for public comment created a need for more information, you can request to hear from people to expand their position. At this time, Commissioner Kylie Miller, you had your hand raised.
Thank you. I'm sure I'm not the only commissioner who has some questions for the developers and maybe for Bart that were not answered within our packet. And I'm just wondering if it would make more sense to get those questions asked and answered first before we go through that list.
Bart, is that typically how we do it?
I don't know that there's a typical answer to that. I think we've done it either way. Quite honestly, I don't have an answer for you on that. I'm sorry.
Okay.
That's how we've done it for most of the 6 years I've been on the Plan Commission.
Great.
Okay.
Oh yeah, of course, you've been, yeah. No, that's fine to ask the questions now. If that's your preference, let's do that as long as everybody's asking their questions at once. And so that then when we start going through the factors, we focus on that just to keep the process more clear. I'd appreciate it. Okay, it sounds like you have a question.
I have a lot of them. Just get comfy. All right. And again, these first questions are for the Wimmer Group. I'd like to, if you could explain to us how the parking spaces on site are allocated. Does each apartment get one? What happens if a tenant doesn't want a space? Does it go into a pool for those who would like, you know, to park 2 cars on site? That's my first question.
Good evening. Yes, each apartment is allocated a space if someone were to not own a vehicle. That parking space could potentially be, rented out for a separate parking stall for a separate resident.
Okay. Thank you. And so let's say then that first person who passed on having a parking space moves out and the next person moves in. If all your 44 spaces are allocated, they're just going to have to be on the street until there's an opening for a space. Does that make?
No, that's not true. Basically, what we do is we have each apartment has first rights to a parking stall. If they do not have a vehicle, personal vehicle, that they would be utilizing it, it would go to another resident who would be requesting a second. We keep that in a list based on the priority or the timing that they've requested it. That is, if a resident comes in, moves out, and is a new resident wants an interior stall, that one that had been given is really an optional lease that we can terminate and allow for the new resident to have interior parking stalls.
Got it. Thank you. All right. Secondly, are the parking spaces, whether inside or outside, assigned to specific apartment tenants? So for example, during the day or evening, if they're at work or, you know, out for the evening, that no one else can park in them?
Typically.
Okay.
Excuse me, Commissioner Kylie Miller, was your question around interior parking stalls or exterior?
Either kind, you know, so whether you park inside or outside, if you're at work or, you know, you're out at a Bucks game or whatever, that your car is not there, that some other tenant could not, or a guest of a tenant or someone else could not come and park in that space. That's what I wanted to know, that it's assigned to you. You know, you get space number 30, you get space number 10, you know, that you have your own space. Okay.
Typically, yes, that is correct.
Okay, thank you. I'm wondering, you, besides your on-site employee in the management office, you listed a long list of staff and services that it's great to provide for your tenants, whether it's on-site maintenance, pet grooming, landscape services. And I'm wondering, where will those employees park? You know, how many do you expect to have on-site, either full-time or part-time at one time?
In our lease-up period after opening the project, there would be a full-time leasing agent and property manager on site. As the project leases up, a project of this size would typically not require full-time staff on site and maintenance as required, which would likely be in a part-time situation. Some of the other services you mentioned are as required, as needed by residents, as requested. So there would be occasional services that would either have some availability. As we know, there's some flexible arrangements with residents where they have a typical schedule where their car may be at work. Some of those spaces may be used for our on-site personnel during that arrangement.
Okay. Thank you. Now, it did say that parking is included in the rent. So I would think then more residents who have cars would opt to park, you know, on site rather than on the, you know, off the property. Your memo says that you're based on your, like, for your most recent projects, 73% of apartment units have one vehicle. So I'm wondering, of the remaining 27%, how many have more than one vehicle and how many have none? I know that each property is different, but just based on, you know, the ones that you looked at.
The majority of the remaining percentage would have two vehicles, but it should be noted the communities that were referenced were in Menominee Falls and Brookfield, communities that have very low walkability scores in comparison with this site's 76 very walkable score, as well as the alternative transportation of rideshare, the bus stop, green line directly in front of the property, as well as potential bike share opportunities.
Okay. Besides there was some mention of some of the units being available for short-term rentals, you know, maybe someone who's been, you know, coming to Milwaukee for a new job or professional athlete or whatever. Do you have any percentage that you anticipate would be these short-term rentals And in your experience, if you've had that happen in other properties, how many of those folks have a vehicle?
The majority of our renters are 12-month leases, full-time rentals. I don't have a percentage of short-term rentals offhand.
Okay, so you don't really have any particular expectations for this property? How many would be kind of not transient, but just not intending to stay there long-term?
The majority of renters would be full-term rentals.
Okay, thank you. So you said the demographics for your residents, at least at this property, your demographics are an average income over 90,000, an average age of 42, renting a luxury apartment. So I'm wondering, for those without vehicles, how many in this demographic, paying a rent for a luxury apartment and making over 90,000 a year, do you anticipate are going to hop on a bike or a bus to get to work, to go shopping, or attend some, cultural event in the evening?
I don't have that data.
Okay. All right. I thought that was very generous of you to offer to sponsor a bubbler bike station. We used to have one right across the street where the Fiddleheads Cafe is now. But I just wanted to point out that when Bubbler came into Shorewood, they noted that for their model to work, it was important to have a bike station every few blocks. And because they're really were intended more for people coming into Shorewood to visit our grocery stores, our bars, our restaurants, whereas residents here already own bikes. And when they left the village, because we were not going to give them additional financial help, they said that even with that, their business model really wasn't working. So although I really appreciate your offer to sponsor a bike station, that's probably not going to happen. So in that thought that most Shorewood residents have bikes, so they can use our bike paths, will the building provide some kind of storage area for bicycles?
Yes, there are storage areas for bicycles in the underground parking garage area. Additionally, we were aware that there was a bubbler station right across the street from the site, which was a huge benefit, we thought, to the community and to the proposed redevelopment project. It was in conversation with staff that we understood kind of the situation and the agreement with Bubbler, and doing a little bit more research, we found that there may be open to some conversation to restore that station. That's why this statement was made.
Yeah, it was disappointing when they left. Among the alternative means of transportation, rail was mentioned. And of course, we don't have rail in Shorewood. And with the narrowness of Oakland, I doubt we'll ever see the hop extend up there. Bart, I have a question for you. In your staff comments, it was on page 9 of that first memo, you said, or you wrote, excess on-site parking is expected during peak parking times, which may be made available to residents and guests through flexible arrangements and signage for their surface level spaces. Would you explain to us what that means?
That was provided by the applicant, so I'd be happy to defer to the Wimmers on that. Perhaps you can point it out or read it again for them.
Yeah, that was on page 9 of your memo. It says, excess on-site parking is expected during peak parking times, which may be made available to residents and guests through flexible arrangements and signage for the surface level spaces.
I believe what that statement is referring to, kind of in regards to the situation I described earlier, where there may be residents that have a typical weekday schedule where they would be at work and would leave their parking stall vacant, surface stall during the day. There can be flexible arrangements made where those parking stalls would be allowed for an Amazon truck delivery van to pull into that stall, or a guest space during certain hours where we know the resident won't be occupying that stall.
Okay. Thank you. Going back to the 43 apartments in the building. You've got 16 2-bedrooms and 27 1-bedrooms. Based on our market and your other projects, who do you, I think you said you were targeting young professionals and empty nesters. Who do you anticipate renting the 1-bedroom apartments and who would rent the 2-bedroom apartments? Because I think that would help us understand, you know, how many vehicles is that kind of renter going to bring with them?
The short answer is that all types of demographics and renters rent all different types of units across our portfolio.
Okay. So nothing that's, we can say like, oh, a retired couple is likely to want a 2-bedroom. A young couple might be happy with the 1-bedroom. You haven't seen any particular patterns like that.
No.
Okay, thanks so much. I think at age 67, I'm the oldest member of the Plan Commission and the only one with firsthand experience being retired. So I will say that I would doubt that any, you know, seniors would want a 1-bedroom apartment. Couldn't even talk my 90-year-old dad into one. Based on your—
That's not our experience.
Oh, well, I'm just telling you, nobody I know who's retired, none of my friends have given up their 3 bedrooms or gone less than 2 bedrooms or given up their vehicles. Based on your anticipated demographics of the 43 units and how many you thought would be dual household, single males or single females, it looks like you could if those held true, you could possibly have 92 possible residents. So when we think about however many spaces the code would ask for, yeah, I'm just thinking about possible residents too. I also wanted to thank you. I appreciate that you took more time and spent more money to update that traffic study for us. There was one point about comparing the number of trips to and from the property compared to when the bank was there. And that, I can't remember what it was a 375 or 3 something. As you noted earlier, that bank property's been empty for about 4 years. So, you know, all that, all those statistics were pretty old. North Shore Bank came before the Plan Commission in July of 2016 for a drive-through permit for their new location on Oakland. And I asked at the time about customer use. And one of the executives, Ms. Doyle, stated that 45% of the customers use the lobby services, while 55% use the drive-through. But she also commented that since 2010, 40% of transactions decreased at the Lake Bluff location and 25% at their other location on Capitol in Oakland. And that was not due to a decrease in customers, but more so the way customers are choosing to do their banking, meaning online. And so in the last 6 years, I'm assuming that online banking has only increased. And so I just wanted to point out that if we're trying to make a comparison between use of that property as a bank and use with the apartments, that probably isn't really accurate or relevant.
Well, if I could respond to that for a moment.
Please do.
I believe what you're referring to is the Institute of Transportation Engineers multiplier for a drive-through bank structure based on the 17,000 square feet that occupy that structure with 3 drive-through lanes. That called out for using that multiplier was I think 375 trips per day. If we are going to estimate what the future project of 43 mid-rise residential units would produce in traffic, we needed to have a comparable multiplier. If we're going to anticipate the future, we must look at what that means for the present. As we know, that bank has been vacant for a few years. However, for over 50 years, it operated there, and it operated there with a special parking exemption of a 27 stall reduction. So to try and compare kind of what we're proposing and using the same numbers and multipliers, it made sense to include that data. I would also add, it appeared that in your conversation with North Shore Bank, I think what I just heard mentioned was that a lot less people were using transportation to go to the bank, which kind of adds to the point of a lot less reduction in the need for a car on a daily use in Shorewood. So we would agree with that statement.
Well, at least until they need cash. But sticking with the traffic study, I had a question on Exhibit 1. And you had the middle chart was for new apartment trips. And then you had the existing and the build traffic volume. I was wondering the volume of vehicles leaving and entering the alley, why it was so low. It looks like only 10 will be leaving the alley during the morning peak hour, as well as the afternoon peak hour. And only 5 would be returning into that alley in the morning and 10 in the afternoon. So we've got 44 parking spaces on site. Why only 10 coming and going during those peak hours?
As I mentioned, also joining us on this call is Tammy Shishevsky from Caddy. Tammy, if you wouldn't mind chiming in and referencing the parking study question, that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Similar to what he said about the parking comparison we put in that table, the trip generation is based on the Institute of Transportation Engineers national trip rates. And they compile a lot of data, and in a 2-hour AM peak hour, peak period 7 to 9 a.m. and then a 2-hour peak period in the afternoon 4 to 6 p.m. They see how many trips that per unit would generate. And then there's a proportion for in and a proportion for out. And so based on those national trip rates, that's the number of trips that is saying that apartment would generate. Now, throughout the day, that's where you get more of your ins and outs. People leave at different times. These people aren't going to necessarily, maybe they're not working if they're retirees, maybe they're not taking their kids to and from school. So the traffic patterns are not going to be what we see as an AM rush hour where everybody leaves and goes to work and everybody returns at the end of the day. They're going to be dispersed throughout the day. And so 5 to 10 cars difference, we round to 5. So it's just a very general, generic number. What we're saying in that exhibit is basically, it's about even, about the same amount coming in as about coming out.
Yeah, it just seemed, I mean, most of us live in Shorewood in either 1 or 2 family homes. And so just based on the traffic on our blocks, it just seemed unusually low for multifamily buildings. So I wanted to make sure to ask you about that. One reason that, when you did that traffic study in July, it really caught my eye was the low number of pedestrians, knowing that that is a major route for kids to, walk to Lake Bluff Elementary School. So I was very interested to see the pedestrian count on the September traffic study, and that it noted 167 pedestrians and bicyclists crossing Oakland on the north side of that intersection, going from, east towards west. And probably mostly kids, or, maybe some walking with their parents, and probably walking past that entrance and exit, compared to like only 20 on the south side of that intersection. So when we're thinking about safety concerns for the kids, that was just, something we needed to be aware of. Last year, maybe about this time, the Plan Commission was discussing approvals for Fiddlehead's Coffee across Lake Bluff from this property. And at the time, there was some discussion about the dangerous and reckless driving down that stretch. Maybe when Commissioner Kudo speaks later, he could kind of brief us on that, because I don't remember all the details. But I just wanted to mention that I don't know if it's because people are trying to beat the light or they're rushing to get their child to school, but that was kind of a tricky stretch. There was on the parking aspect, it was noted, I think, that there were like 26 parking spaces available during the evening peak hours. And we should remember that the village board granted a liquor license to a restaurant that's going to open up, I think, fairly shortly, just south of Fiddleheads. So that number of parking spaces of 26 is probably going to get reduced somewhat by the patrons of that new restaurant.
Commissioner Kylie Miller, it seems like you're getting into comments that relate to the findings and factors rather than questions. Could you?
Okay, well, let me look for my question marks and I'll skip ahead.
Okay, that'd be great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, Commissioner Millie is looking for our next question.
right.
Do you mind if I ask one?
No, go ahead, Josh.
Thank you kindly.
I'm sorry.
No. I always very much appreciate your attention to detail. My question was around safety as well. And I'm just curious, from the traffic engineer and to Bart, does this development seem to pose any additional risk that like any other development of a similar size, or if it was spread out? Like, is there any particular hazard here that we won't see if a bank were to pop back in or something like that? Can you help me understand that?
I think you're muted, Tammy.
We did do a safety analysis for the intersection, but as you can see, the number of trips for this site is pretty low in the peak hour. If it were a bank, if it were a retail development or anything else, then the trip generation would be higher. And so that would, create more of an impact on the traffic in the area. From a lot of the studies that I do, this is a low trip generating development, 5 to 10 cars per movement. For the ones that do have movements, it's very low. It didn't affect the traffic operations. It didn't require more time necessarily to be given to the side streets than what they have now. So that means we're still able to get the green time needed to cross pedestrians safely. It's just a low trip generator. Other uses on site would undoubtedly be higher.
And I can just share, I'm not a transportation engineer, so I'm just sharing the perspective of the planner. So I've been in Shorewood for 4 years. I have not received complaints on traffic related to multifamily developments. The only complaints that I've received were with respect to drive-through establishments, particularly the North Shore Bank drive-through and Culver's restaurant. So those are the only traffic complaints that have come into my office in the last 4 years. None have been associated with multifamily developments.
Thank you.
Barbara, do you have more questions?
No, I ran out of question marks. So everything else I have is for just discussion later. Thanks for asking.
Any other questions from commissioners? Okay. Well, with that, let's move on to the factors and findings per 535-51B. Factor 1, the effect of granting the exception will have on the adjacent parking and traffic conditions. I think this does apply. I'd like to hear from the commissioners as to whether you support the finding as presented or not, or anything else that you have to say regarding this item. Okay, Barbara Kiley Miller.
Thank you, President McKay. Just a couple of comments that there was noted that neighboring residential properties have either garages or driveways and alleys, but those properties still need guest parking, street parking for guests and contractors. So it's not that they're not using up any space on the street. Also, some of you are already aware of this, but a few years ago when the Draft and Vessel, which is across the street on the west side of Oakland, came before the village board to get approval for their parklet in the street. And I was at that meeting, and several small businesses along that stretch were there and were very concerned about the loss of, it was going to be just 2 or 3 parking spaces on the street. And for some of the reasons that we heard tonight, because they had elderly customers, it was difficult for their clients to walk, a couple blocks to get to their locale. I know that dentist Carolyn Griffin wrote us a letter that she is concerned about that. So as far as adjacent parking and traffic conditions, I think that is a concern. It's been expressed by the small business owners, at least 3 of them that we've heard from, who are immediately adjacent to this property. So I think that's a concern.
Therese Klein.
Hey, yeah, so I think my comment is acknowledging that what the proposal has brought forward, I think addresses the concern. We've also heard from a number of residents that are fine with the development and the traffic that it brings to the area. Looking at the bigger picture of the development and the tax base and being progressive and creating space for people to use alternate forms of transportation, such as walking or other modes of transportation. So acknowledge that there's an impact, but change has an impact. And new development versus an empty building will have an impact. But does it degrade what we have today? I don't think so. I think that the candidate here has brought forward a reasonable explanation.
Thank you. Mr. Kudo.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I would agree with actually both commissioners' comments. You know, I mean, obviously any development's going to have an impact. I mean, there's no way that you're not going to have some impact beyond an empty building, right? I mean, I live across the street from the bank. It's a blight. There's nothing that's going on there, and there's something that has been going on there for some time. What I would say is that we have heard from local business owners, small business owners who just made it through the pandemic. We have heard from residents. We have heard from any number of folks who all oppose this development, not because it's a development, but because of the parking exceptions, because of the increased traffic on Lake Bluff, on Oakland, on Kramer, on frankly my block. And so, you know, while I do understand and I am concerned about, you know, being progressive and trying to increase different modes of transportation, I haven't seen any commitment from the county or from the state or anywhere else for increased transportation funding. What I have seen is a cut to that funding year after year. And so without any commitments from the county or the state, without any increased transportation funding, without any other modes of transportation, and with just, you know, what we're looking at here is not less cars, it's just less parking. And so, you know, I think this has a negative impact, and I certainly think that it's, you know, something that we can discuss or whatever for the first issue.
Commissioner Klein?
Yeah, and just a comment here. I mean, the amount of traffic increases a perception or an opinion. I don't think it's been stated that traffic goes up in the area. What we're here to talk about is the parking exception, right?
Right. But how could traffic not go up if there's increased cars from a bank that is not populated?
Whether the cars park in the building or on the street, that's not our issue to talk about here today. Our issue to talk about here today, as I understand it, is whether they park in the building or on the street.
Right.
Thank you. Let's go around and I'd like to hear from all commissioners, and then we can go around second. And let's, Barbara Kelly Miller, you've got something you got to say right now.
Oh, I just wanted to respond to Therese. That first point that President McKay asked us to consider is the effect the granting of the exception will have on adjacent parking and traffic conditions. So yes, we must consider the traffic as well as the parking spaces. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
And if I could just add, you know, I think as was stated, a residential redevelopment at this site would likely have the lowest impact on traffic versus a commercial, retail, or bank or medical office type of property.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Commissioner Pollack, did you have something? Or you were just going thumbs up to?
Yeah, the clarification of the factor that we are going, but I'm happy to say that when we're thinking about this application, we're thinking about this exception in terms of what's good for the community for this particular development. And then I'm kind of considering alternatives in kind of the back of my mind saying like, well, what would be better than this? And this is where I'm like, as I'm exploring the factors here, I think for factor one, there might be an impact, but it seems like this is likely a fairly benign impact for at least the first factor.
Trustee Buckhorst, would you like to?
I'll pretty much concur with what was just said regarding that, what Commissioner Pollack said. As another factor to consider, if we are relating traffic increases to cars, et cetera, I'm not sure if they were required to build, extra parking for those cars and bring extra cars in, then on the same token as one of the other commissioners said, then you would expect more cars on the street. So I don't think that's what we're trying to determine, the rationale behind that, but I'd say I concur completely with what Mr. Pollack said.
Commissioner Wickland?
No, I'm just trying to hide over here. But yeah, I think the comments have been great from everybody on both sides of this, and we always definitely appreciate the input and love hearing everybody else's thoughts as well.
I would say on this factor, parking is a dynamic thing. So people come, they park, they complete their business, they move on, they go to work, they come home, so it's not a static one-to-one. There could potentially be zero impact to adjacent parking because there's no indication that people are going to have more than one car in this development. So it could be that all the cars that are associated with this development park on site, and there's no need for additional. As far as transportation goes, Milwaukee County Transit System confirmed that the 2 bus lines in Shorewood have the highest level of service, and they haven't been reduced in any of the previous initiatives, and they are going to stay that way. I mean, it's a priority. Also, there was a state cut, but at the ICC meeting, the intergovernmental relations person from the county reported that they were able to recover, they've almost recovered all of the funding cut through alternative revenues and spending, and they have some federal dollars that they're going to go after. So I think that that's a good thing for this year, and while that doesn't protect us in future years, it's just that really says to me that there's a really high commitment to public transportation. So I think that in introducing more customers, more rider base is a good thing for Factor 1. So moving on to Barbara, your hand's still up. Did you have something else to say on Factor 1?
I just thought maybe it was important for us to acknowledge that the reason the developers are before us tonight is that the village board, when they had a chance, did not approve a reduction in our parking code from the current 1.75 spaces per unit for multifamily buildings. That motion failed. And the parking exception that was granted to Catalyst Partners for the project on Capitol and Stoll is currently under appeal and will not be heard until October 5th. And there is really not any way for any of us to predict how any of those decisions are going to pan out. I mean, the village board may decide to keep it at 1.75. They may decide, yes, we want to lower to 1.0. They may land somewhere in the middle, 1.5 or whatever. So let's just keep in mind that ultimately zoning issues lie with the village board, and that has not been decided. And it appears that, it might be imminent. We have a couple of buildings a block north of this property on Kensington and Oakland who were able to meet the village code. Now, granted, they only had 3 floors of apartments to fill because their first floor is commercial space. And they also did it by having a larger number of 2 and 3 bedroom apartments versus just the 2 and 1 bedrooms that Wimmer has proposed. And I totally get it. The more units you can fit in a footprint, the higher your profit's going to be, because a 2-bedroom apartment, the rent for that is not twice as much as a 1-bedroom. But there's a way to compromise. But it's just that I don't think the parking requirement that we have right now is that onerous. If we look at ways that we could make this property be a win-win for everybody, the developer, the neighborhood, the businesses, the village. So, but so far, the village board and our Board of Appeals has not decided on that yet.
Yeah, and this body recommended the modifications 5.2. But I would say that those comments, while of course valid are and appreciated, would fit more with factor 13. All things can be deemed relevant.
I'll be happy to.
And not about adjacent parking. Oh, I'll remember. Thank you.
I was wondering if we could briefly respond.
So.
Just the comment that a 2 or 3 bedroom apartment unit would require less parking stalls. That's actually the opposite of what the Institute of Traffic Engineers states in their mid-rise multifamily parking standards.
Trustee Bockhorst.
Thank you. And don't worry, Barbara, I'll be bringing up the counterpoints to what you mentioned, considering I'm on both this and the village board and have been part of those discussions. But I guess one thing I wanted to, and forgive me if we already brought this back, I believe the developers had said that there were 27 spots deficient, the bank that exists there now.
Yes, based on the square footage and use of the bank and the village code, when it was developed in the 1960s, I believe there is that special parking exception granted at that time in the 1960s and is in effect today. So if we were to be another bank coming through to occupy this space, we would not actually need to appear before the Plan Commission. And Bart can certainly correct me if I'm off on this, but I believe that use would be grandfathered in. A drive-through bank use would be grandfathered into that parking exception. However, because we are changing the use to multifamily, we are before you today. And also of note, as studies have shown, the residential use is a much lower traffic and parking impact than a bank use.
Okay, thank you. And then just a reminder, as President McCullough-McKeag had mentioned, this body voted 5-2 to change the parking requirement from 1.75 to 1-to-1. So anyway, thank you.
Yeah, I think that'll be under factor 13 as well. Commissioner Wickland?
Yeah, I was also going to comment. Barbara, you're right about the boards did not make a decision on that. But at the same time, that's the reason why all this parking stuff, and I think I've expressed frustration on that. Eric has expressed frustration that because of that inability to actually change things, these things are always in front of us for a lot of different reasons.
So could you go wash your hands?
I did wash my hands. And I think Josh made a comment, that I thought was great there, where, I mean, I think if, and correct me if I'm wrong, Bart, but if this was a proposal for a Chick-fil-A at this site, it wouldn't be in front of us for parking, right? I mean, there'd be plenty of parking there for it, and I can only imagine what that would do to the neighborhood. So, I think, Barbara's got some great ideas, but at the same time, we've got to focus on what's before us. What's been sitting there. Eric's made the comment, it's been this blight, and it's really exciting to have something in front of us that could solve that problem for the village. And I get that there may be some negative consequences for that, but again, we're weighing these points and we're looking at, does the good outweigh the bad here? And that's our job here, is to decide that, not necessarily the board.
All right. Thank you. With that, I would propose that we move on to factor 2. 1 down, 12 to go, guys. The effect of granting the exception will have on the appearance and character of the applicant's property, adjacent property, and neighboring property. So in the application, it points out what will be changed in the appearance and the benefits of that. Discussion from the commissioners. In support of the finding as presented or in a lack of support. Commissioner Wickland, did you say something?
Yeah, I was just saying, I don't think this is a hard one. I think this is definitely going to improve it. I think that's what we were just talking about, so.
You're muted.
I see a thumbs up from Trustee Bockhorst. I see a hands up from Barbara Kylie Miller. Would you like to speak to this factor?
I will. Two things. I really like the townhouse appearance of it with the, you know, the staircases going up to the apartments on the first floor. I think that's really nice, and it ties in with the apartment building just to the north of it. One of the negatives is, though, I'm sure that all the setbacks are met, that the south facing apartments in that existing building, they're only going to be about 11 to 12 feet from the new building. So, you know, they're going to lose their sunlight. And at least towards the rear of the building may have those few balconies looking directly into their windows. So I'm not sure what that will do to the value of those apartment buildings. I do think if it was like a year from now and we had finished our form-based zoning code changes, that this building may not even be on our radar because it is quite a bit taller than the others at that intersection. But, you know, we're here now. So I don't know that, you know, I had lunch with a friend from Pewaukee at North Shore Boulangerie a couple of weeks ago. And as I was waiting for her at my table inside, I was looking across at that bank building, thinking what I liked and didn't like about it. One thing I did like was that I could see the sky above it. So, you know, it is going to be pretty huge. And so it will be a dramatic change for that neighborhood. Some good, some bad. You know, I like the materials. I think it's, you know, well done. It's not slapping up something that's going to look cheap. So luxury on the outside, it will be conveyed to the inside as well.
Oh, Commissioner Klein, did you have something? I saw a hand. No? Okay. All right. Commissioner Kudo, Commissioner Pollock, would you like to speak? Okay.
I would just like to add that the building height and setback requirements are met per the existing zoning of the property.
I think that the proposed building looks pretty nice, so I think it has a net positive impact on the character of the applicant's property and the surrounding properties.
Mm-hmm. I concur. Commissioner Kudo, you changed your mind?
No. I no, but I mean, I think it's a great looking building. I have no problems with how it looks and the setbacks at all. I think it's a nice property, nice looking property.
Okay. Trustee Bockhorst, did you have something to add to factor 2?
I much prefer the brutalism style of the bank, or I'm joking, whatever it is. But no, I do think this is an enhancement. The area of surface lots and all of the different ins and outs over there are pretty ugly, although I know that. So anyway, this is a drastic improvement.
Okay. Commissioner Miller? Yes?
One last thought.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Someone mentioned this earlier, maybe it was Sam Essec, the ecological aspect to it. And so I did wonder if there was an opportunity for solar panels or any permeable surface on the, you know, in the exterior parking lot.
Is that part of this item?
Yeah, I would say that isn't related to this factor, but I will allow, I don't want you to waste time later repeating it. Is that directed to the applicant? Okay.
At this stage, those items have not been explored.
Thank you.
Moving on to item 3, the effect the granting of the exception will have on the property values of the applicant's property, adjacent property, and neighboring property. Discussion from the commission. Commissioner Kudo?
Can someone with some expertise in that area enlighten us? I mean, this comes up every time, and I'm certainly not a real estate expert. Other than I think the building looks better than the old building, but that, that's just my personal opinion. So can someone enlighten us as to the ramifications of this new property in those areas, please?
Well, I would also, I think it's included in the application as well. Commissioner Woodland?
Sorry.
Yeah, I'm no expert. I can pretend to be an expert on anything, but I think that, I mean, clearly when we look at this one, the applicant's property that was in the packet, right? We know that it's going to be worth significantly more. And I did look at those numbers there for the adjacent properties from the appraisal. I mean, it looked like, something that could potentially help out.
Mm-hmm. The Wimmers, well, who wants to speak?
I just wanted to respond that the Meganberg research, that study was included in the packets, addressed exactly this question. I believe they used the Mosaic as a similar property with a similar parking scenario. Multifamily residential property in recent years can track the fair market value of adjacent and neighboring properties over the years since it's been occupied, as well as looked at some recent sales of those properties, all of which increased in value since the property was built. That was a very short summary of the Meganberg research report, but that was included. Thank you.
Bart and Barbara?
Sure, yeah, I just one quick thing. So I did reach out to the village's contractor assessor on this question. And I just want to remind us what we're looking at. It's the effect of granting the exception will have on property values. So the exception in this case potentially could lead to more on-street parking. And so that's how they chose to answer it. And so the question that was raised to our assessor at Accurate Assessor, I did not unfortunately get a definitive answer. The answer was, I believe the answer is no, but I'm checking with the owner of our company to make sure. I did follow up later in July for a further response. And the final response I got was, he said no as well, but we would have to review sales data to see. I have not heard back from the assessor since that, but I have attempted to get an answer from on that specific question with respect to whether or not off-street or on-street parking affects property values adjacent to multifamily developments.
Thank you. Barbara?
Yeah, I thought the question more had not with on-street parking, but whether a multifamily building would affect the values of single-family homes. And so that's what
parking exception. It's the granting the exception. Would that have an impact? That's the question, I believe.
Okay. Yeah, because the mosaic numbers, well, interesting, really should have looked at 2015 because there was a dramatic drop from 2015 to 2016. But it's pretty difficult to compare a 6-story building, which I think is a big factor compared to this building. So, and they had a parking structure there. So I'm not quite sure how helpful these numbers were for us.
So in other words, you're rejecting the finding within the application.
Pretty much. I mean, the woman who lives right behind Mosaic is a friend of mine. And I looked also, so I looked at her values on the village website. You know how you can look up, your tax records. And I mean, so the numbers weren't accurate, at least from the village's website to this sheet were not accurate. And so when I did the math, I mean, it looked like there was less than a 2% increase for homes on Bartlett once the Mosaic went up. There was a dramatic drop and then they came up. But, how much that had to do with the people parking on the street, how much that had to do with the height of the building, I don't think it's possible for us to answer.
Mm-hmm. Attorney Baird, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention it's specific. All these factors specifically relate to the parking, not the underlying development. Because especially in this particular case, because the underlying development otherwise meets the existing code, the existing zoning in that area. But the other thing to keep in mind though is some of these items, like, for example, at the very top, it says that to evaluate these as they apply or as applicable. And if you think about, just to use a specific example, with respect to a residential parking space, there's all kinds of regulations that say, they have to be paved. It can't be within in so many feet of the setback, or it can't be on the side, so it's seen from the front. There's all of these different types of special exceptions, the application for the special exception applies to all of these very, very different and diverse parking regulations. So when it says evaluate as applicable, some of these just don't fit the particular thing that you're evaluating. For example, the easiest example of that is number 8 says if senior housing is proposed, you're supposed to evaluate all these other things. So, and obviously this is not senior housing, so you skip over that one. So the point being is that when you ask, like, for example, whether the granting of the exception will serve a public or desirable or useful purpose, it's not do we like housing in that area? Do we like apartments in that area, or would we rather have a restaurant or a bank? That's not the question. The question is more specifically related to the parking exception. And, in this particular instance, is it going to create potentially more vehicles on the street? Or, you still have the issue of, if someone came in and said, I don't need a special parking exception because I can meet the 1.75 ratio, you're still going to have increased traffic there regardless of where they're parking. So it's even more limited than that. The question is really with respect to allowing those spots to be essentially off-site as opposed to on-site. Will that impact, for example, in number 3 here, will that have any impact on the property values of the applicant's property, adjacent property, and neighboring property? So again, it's not the bigger picture. Do we like apartments versus restaurants? It's more specific to the parking exception.
Thank you. So I would say, that granting the parking exception would not affect property values based on what we have in front of us. All right, moving on to factor 4, whether the granting of the parking exception will serve a public or desirable or useful purpose. Is it applicable? Do you support the finding presented? Do you oppose? Barbara?
Thanks. I made quite a few notes about public benefit because I think we've had a lot of discussion about that at the CDA, at the board, at the Plan Commission when we were doing the comprehensive plan. The developer said one of the public benefits would be an expansion of luxury housing. And that's not really a village goal that we have set for ourselves. It doesn't provide more families to our school district because based on their calculations, there's only going to be 2 children living in the building, or 1.9, but let's just round it up to 2 children. So if we're thinking one of our goals is to have more family-friendly housing, that doesn't meet that. One of the major goals that we have set for ourselves this year village-wide is more affordable housing. I love that there's going to be single-story housing for older people if they want to move into, and I don't mean like, more like active seniors, like the Oaks. So, we don't want to do stairs. I broke a foot this winter. I could have used a single-story house or apartment, but it doesn't meet the affordable, by any means, our goal of affordable housing. And so when we think about where are we going to put affordable housing, here's a site, whether that required a village investment, we've got $2 million set aside for that, or whether the developer could get some sort of state or federal credits to do it, doesn't meet that public benefit that we've decided. The developer also said that we didn't have enough luxury apartments, but between the Oaks, the Mosaic, and the Lighthouse, yes, they were all done with TIF money, but they're pretty luxurious apartments. And I also don't think we can, well, actually, maybe this is also I wrote down under public benefits. We can't predict what a post-pandemic village is going to look like. I mean, there were hardly any people in the restaurant when I was there 2 weeks ago. What is it going to look like for the customer base in traffic and parking for those who need or want to work at home? So, you know, it's pretty hard to make predictions of the future, whether for the next 5 years or the next 50. Tenants who already live in those vast number of, you know, vintage apartment buildings that we have that were built without parking have struggled over the years. I've lived here and been a homeowner for 32 years. So I've heard about this over and over, no matter who was in office in the village, that they struggled to find parking. And so I'm wondering why we would deliberately put up a building that is going to contribute to that problem. I think we need to respect how people live now. And if we have set goals that we want to achieve, outlined in our comprehensive plan that the village board and the CDA have set into, you know, I guess I'm having a hard time figuring out, besides more housing, an attractive, you know, building replacing what we have now at the bank, at the vacant bank. I'm just struggling to find out what the public benefit would be. And again, as I said earlier, I think if we had finished our form-based code that, you know,
Right,
this
we
might
haven't.
decide. I know, so that's, you know, it's hard
Yeah,
to
we gotta
go ahead.
stay today with what we got going on. So for me, item 4, the public benefit by granting the exception is increased customer base for the market area. I have a cat here that wants to get in here, and increased tax base. Other commissioners' findings for factor 4. All right, Commissioner Klein?
Yeah, just maybe a question. So we're deliberating on granting an exception to parking before we know anything about this building and if it needs a TIF or if they'll ask for one. What our if I'm right there, what our deliberation is about is if the fact that people park on the street, right? Does that serve a public or desirable, useful purpose? So I'm just trying to get my head around the useful purpose of a parking exception. Is it that it brings in new development, which helps our tax base, which helps everyone in the village, versus or weighing that with the impact that it has on the people that live locally, that own businesses locally, that shop locally. I'm just trying to weigh those and understand how those relate.
Do you have somebody that the question is directed to, or is it rhetorical?
I think maybe it's just looking for, yeah, I apologize. It wasn't a well-formed question at all.
No, it's fine. I just wanted to know who it was directed to.
This is directed to maybe Bart, maybe Nate. You know, our role here isn't to decide if this development is right for the village. It's to decide if this parking exception is right for the village. Because so much could change in the development after we grant this exception. The entire building, you know, everything could change.
To answer your question, it's the latter.
Yeah, and I think Nathan has shared this before as well. The 13 items don't have to all be applicable, correct? And so these are just questions that are in the code to help you as a plan commissioner determine whether or not you are in favor of granting it or not. And so maybe some of them are more important than others, but with respect to this particular question, I read it as whether or not you as a plan commissioner think that granting the exception will result in a desirable public or desirable useful purpose. And that really would be, you know, at your decision factor. Other commissioners have shared yes or no on that. And so I think this is just one of the 13 factors. And to your point on things could change, if those things change, those would be if it's a setback, that would be your issue. If it's an architectural thing, that's design review board. If it's a financial assistance, that's the CDA and the village board. And so those other factors, you know, definitely have other approval processes for them. your role in this discussion is really with respect to the parking exception.
And to sort of pick up on what Bart is talking about there, again, keep in mind that 53551 and the criteria listed for the special exceptions are a overarching set of criteria that can apply to anyone applying for a special exception for any of the parking regulations, not just the 1.75 ratio. And again, the example I think I used earlier was that there are other regulations that apply to, say, a residential setting where you can't just throw down some gravel behind your house and then create a parking space in the front if there's the opportunity to have a garage or something in the back because of aesthetic reasons. And in that particular case, if somebody was saying, well, I want an exception, a special parking exception, because I want to throw down some gravel and park my car in the front of my house, then absolutely the question of, well, if we grant that special parking exception, geez, that's going to have an impact on the neighbor's property values because it doesn't match with everything else and it looks awful and it's going to create dust and it's going to do all that stuff. In this particular case, we're kind of mixed. I think there's a tendency to mix up and conflate, well, what is the underlying development being proposed? And let's debate that as opposed to the special parking exception. And so it's more limited because, again, as I mentioned earlier, if this particular developer had the ability to say, okay, well, we can meet the 1.75 ratio, we wouldn't be here. So really the question is, what's the gap between the amount of parking that they're going to have on site that they have available and that gap between the 1.75 ratio and the amount of spots that are actually on site? And, all of those factors you've been talking about, will people self-select and not, have two cars, or will they have two cars? Will it create, the amount of traffic that's going to be created is essentially could be the same either way, depending of whether the parking is on site or not, because people have to drive to and from there. But the question really is limited to, if we don't require them on site and on the theoretical level, there's more people parking on the street, what impact is that going to have? And that's really the focus of the discussion. What impact will that specifically have, the granting of this parking special exception related to the 1.75 ratio? What impact will that have on the neighborhood? Not, well, what impact will having multifamily dwelling or apartments in the neighborhood, because that's already part of the zoning. That's already allowed under the zoning. So I think it's a lot narrower than some of the discussion has tended to drift to, and it's natural. It's not anyone's fault. It's not a criticism of anyone, because these things go hand in hand, and it's hard to talk about one without the other. But I think it's important to focus on, what impact does the granting of the exemption have, as opposed to the overall use and development. Bart, is there anything else that I missed there?
Thank you.
Okay, I appreciate that reminder. So Commissioner Miller and Trustee Bockhorst, if you have anything that relates to, if you feel this is applicable and it relates to item 4, please share.
I wanted Therese to clarify her question or her comment. You said that, after a lot could change after we make this decision. Did you mean that, the Stowell decision could be, exception could be denied, or that the board may decide, no, the appropriate parking rate is 1.2? What did you mean by that, I guess?
What I meant by that was that the business case that's proposed of this building, of this look, of this number of apartments, that could change after we make a decision about how many parking spaces it needs to have. The parking spaces question is the first step in bringing forth a new development. This team did a great job of giving us a vision of what it looks like, but that could change, is my point. And so we're really here to debate what the parking exception provides or answer these questions with respect to parking exception, not the fact that it's development.
Okay, got it. Yeah, in fact, Attorney Bayer kind of was saying that, you know, granting this parking exception, which allows higher density, you know, actually creates the potential for excessive traffic and parking problems and so on. Whereas if they could meet the current code or some compromised level, that maybe we wouldn't have to worry about, you know, some of these things. It wouldn't be an issue.
To clarify, that's actually not what I'm saying. What my point was that if they could have all of those on site, it otherwise meets the existing zoning. So in other words, the fact that there's, you know, if they had 75 spots, then they filled all those 75 spots, your issues with respect to what you're talking about with traffic, those are going to exist either way. The parking issue is limited and different from that, because really the only question now is they have X amount of spots on site and they're asking for a special exception to have the remaining spots essentially on the street. So the gap between what they've got on site and what potentially could be parking on the street is the impact that you're really talking about. And that's pretty much it.
Yeah. And that's what our small business owners seem to have the most issue with, is where are their customers going to park? You know, and the customers for that new restaurant that's going to open. So I get that.
Sure. And that's, you know, and that's exactly the type of thing to be discussing.
Commissioner Wickland?
Yeah, and I understand what you're saying, Nate, but at the same time, that's why it's important that we discuss what is going there and what the alternatives are, because that's how we get into parking, right? My point of a restaurant could go there with a line down Lake Bluff to get a burger, you know, that is something to discuss, because granting this exception for this maybe makes it less of an impact on the community than something else that could go there the way it currently sits.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the only reason it's, yeah, if they met the parking ratio, which is made up and antiquated, then they wouldn't even be here and it would be what it is. Trustee Bockhorst?
I'll be really quick. 3 things. Number 1, 5 of the 7 of us voted to change the parking code again. So this is definitely relevant. And 3 of the 6 members present at the village board also voted for it. 1 had abstained, so that caused, you know, and then later on said, I want this to come back after budget so that we could revisit it. This being the revising the code. So we all know, I think everyone here understands that, that this body did say that, yes, this will have a benefit in our municipality to diminish, you know, to reduce the parking 1.75. Number 2, this is not the final version. This goes to design and review board, will not go to the village board unless they request TIF, which currently they are not, for the proposed almost $8 million that'll go directly to the tax roll. But, you know, they could always do that. The village board could always turn them down at that point or whatnot. But anyway, and especially if tonight we don't grant them this, they might be required to build more, which might, you know, might encourage them to want to come through the village board and request TIF money. But regardless, number 4, yes, definitely a desired public benefit. And that's why 5 of the 7 of us, I believe, one of the main reasons that we all voted to decrease the amount, the requirement on the code. So thank you.
Moving on to factor 5, whether the spirit and intent of the requirements of this article are being carried out. So what I'd like to hear from the commissioners is, do you think this is applicable, and have you found it? Do you have a finding? Trustee
President McKay? Yeah, I was just hoping we could make sure that maybe either Nathan or Bart kind of explained it ahead of time, because we've had to have them come in on the back end. So maybe they have a succinct way to reverbose this.
Great. Attorney Bayer, could you make sure we all understand this item, so that this factor, so that we don't discuss something that doesn't apply?
Yeah, are you talking about, it cut out there for a second, subsection 6?
5.
5, okay. Well, so when it says the spirit and intent of the requirements of this article, the article that they're speaking about is is the Article 9 titled off-street parking. And that begins on 535.45 and then runs through, of course, the special exceptions in 535.51. So if the idea there is, I'll use the example I gave earlier, that to use a benign example with respect to parking regulations for single family residences, that, you can't just park your car in the front of the house on a gravel, on a gravel driveway. You've got to have a garage, and you got to, these other types of things. So the general idea is that, with that particular regulation is that we don't have, where it's possible, cars on the street, we don't have them parked in the front. There's an aesthetic aspect. There's a aspect that relates to, of course, uniformity and property values, which is referenced in 535.51. So when it says the spirit and intent of this article, that encompasses the overarching regulation of parking as found between 535.41 and 535.50 in Article 9 off-street parking of Chapter 535. Bart, anything?
Yeah, I have no further specific guidance. The spirit and intent is something to me that I think is a personal interpretation of what the code, why the code, says what it does say. And so that to me would be, once again, at the discretion of the plan commissioners. But to your point, Nathan, they are requesting an exception with respect to the ratio and the enclosed parking. So those would be the two factors that I would, if I was a plan commissioner, be asking myself as to whether or not the ratio they're providing matches the intent of why the village requires any parking, and whether or not being enclosed or unenclosed matters with respect to what they're proposing.
Well put.
So any commissioners that find this applicable can speak to this sector in your finding. Commissioner Miller?
As far as the enclosed, all spaces are supposed to be an enclosed garage. I think that I just want to say, even though said 14 spaces, that are going to be outside, I think because they're on the property, I have no problem with them being not in the garage. That's all.
Thank you. Other commissioners on item 5?
President, you're muted.
Appreciated. Factor 6, recommendations of any boards or committees to which the Plan Commission refers the application for advice. This application has not been referred to any plans or boards or committees. Do any commissioners find this relevant, and please support your finding? Commissioner Kylie Miller?
Thank you. I think it is relevant that the recommendation of the Plan Commission to lower the parking rate to 1 space per unit did not pass at the village board. And even though there were 3 votes for it, I would say let's not count those votes before they're cast when it comes back. So we don't really know. I mean, and the Board of Appeals has not ruled on the Summit property and the Stowell property. So
I'm sorry, but
that's it.
This it refers to the application.
Yeah.
Right. This application is not part of those outside groups, but you can put that on item 13, other things deemed relevant. Trustee Bockhorst, is this applicable and support your finding? No? Okay. Any other commissioners find this applicable and would like to speak? Okay. Seeing none, factor 7, intensity of use, deviation from typical use classifications, access to transit, and physical constraints to meeting parking requirements. So Attorney Baer and Bart, could you provide the guidance for this, considering this factor as to the applicability and the finding?
Yeah, I think this would be more applicable if you had for example, someone seeking a special exception relating to a parking regulation that, say prohibited installing a parking space at a residential property within, the back offset or so many feet of, a neighboring property. Let's say you had a non-conforming lot that was built or constructed or before the existence of the code, and it would essentially be impossible for the individual to comply with the code, then that might be a factor. But here, I don't really see a particular application to the special exception that's before the board this evening. If someone disagrees with that, you can certainly discuss it, and maybe there's something I'm not seeing. But yeah, physical constraints to meeting the parking requirements, perhaps the property is built on a particular type of subsoil that would prevent building down far enough to put any kind of subterranean parking in. Maybe there was something like that, but otherwise it may not be applicable to this particular application. Bart, anything?
Yeah, I mean, I would just add, I don't believe the applicant is requesting any sort of exception based on a physical constraint based on their application. So in my opinion, I agree that that's perhaps not relevant, but once again, it's the plan commissioner's discussion on that. The other three things I think are pretty straightforward in terms of what you're being asked to review. So is the intensity of the use, the deviation from the typical use classifications, is the exception for the ratio in your minds, is it too intensive a use? Is it too far deviating from what the requirements are? That's how I would interpret this one. And then once again, access to transit, I think is pretty straightforward in terms of, they're arguing that they do have access to transit, so they think that the exception is warranted. So based on their application, that's how I would review this. And it would be up to you as the plan commissioners to, discuss whether or not you agree with their stance or if you have other opinions.
Commissioner Kylie Miller.
Just based on what Bart said about intensity of use, I would say that based on other multifamily apartments that we've seen developed in the last dozen years or so, that it does have an increased density or intensity of use than what we've seen before.
Other commissioners that find this relevant and you have comments regarding the application as presented? Okay. Factor 8, if senior housing is proposed, the number of employees on site, the type of senior housing, the parking needs of the residents, if any, and the ratios from the Institute of Transportation Engineers parking generation report ratios for senior housing should be reviewed. Not applicable. Any disagreement from the commission on that? Okay. Factor 9, historical conditions on whether additional parking requirements for new or expanded use may be satisfied with incremental increase commensurate with the new or expanded use. Attorney Bayer and Bart, can you provide guidance for the commission?
Yeah, as this is essentially a tear down and rebuild, we're not really looking at a property with a new or expanded use. We're not converting a property, but I think that in looking at this in the context and historically when this has been applied, I think that was the intent that was conveyed by the authors of this particular ordinance. So I don't think it has a lot of application here, but if you do disagree with that, you could certainly discuss the fact that that there used to be a bank here and there's a tear down and there's going to be new construction. But in my mind, the fact that the construction as is otherwise meets the existing zoning, I think that this is a square peg round hole. I think this was intended to cover a different circumstance. Anything else, Bart?
No.
Okay. Commissioners, Do you have any support or opposition to the finding?
I've never really understood what that meant, to tell you the truth.
All right. All right, factor 10, evidence that actual parking demands may be less than code requirements. I think this one is pretty straightforward. Does anybody need any guidance? Commissioners, would you like to speak as to how relevant you feel this is and what the finding is and whether you support it? Barbara Kiley Miller.
Why do I always have to go first? So far, I guess I'm not convinced that actual parking demands may be less than our 1.75 code requires. I mean, we talk about, urban living, but Shorewood is a suburban bedroom community. I don't know of anybody who works in the village. So people, for the most part, need cars to go to work, whether in Milwaukee County or in other counties or, in Illinois. So I guess I haven't been convinced that, especially in our climate and with the infrastructure that we have for mass transit, and especially during a pandemic, with people have been shying away from mass transit, and that's why the cost of used cars is up so much. I'm not sure that I've seen that that parking requirements are going to be less. I'd be happy to be convinced, but I just don't see it.
Other commissioners? Well, in that case, I have something to speak to for this factor. I do think that given the fact that we have a functional 0.34 ratio going with all the vintage buildings, as it were, that were built without parking, I think it's a pretty good chance that's pretty good evidence that that's been in play for a while. I will also say that, a personal experience I have is going through separating our families into two homes. And one of the good things about Shorewood is that it allows for families that live in two homes to live closely together, which means that those two cars that normally would have been in one place are split between others. And so I do know that my former partner uses only one spot at the Light Horse. And there are other people in those buildings that are divorced as well. So that's a personal experience. 53% of our population rents. They rent for all their very own reasons and have every arrangement of family, lifestyle, and priorities. So moving on to factor 11. Availability of shared parking, including satisfactory documentation of shared parking to satisfy the parking demand. Attorney Baer and Bart, can you provide the guidance on this? And then we will move to commissioner comment.
Sure.
I don't believe the applicant is suggesting that they have a shared parking arrangement. So to me, this would not be applicable unless you're interpreting shared parking to be the shared on-street parking. But in certain circumstances, it's possible that developments could be next to, say, a church or something with a larger off-street parking lot that they have leases for, or they might own a lot separately where they would have leases for that. So traditionally, that is what shared parking means with respect to zoning code. So they're not suggesting that they're providing that. So to me, this one is not applicable. But that's, once again, my interpretation.
I would concur with Bart. In the past, I do recall that there have been proposals that have come forward where adjoining property owners have essentially one parking lot centrally located between them, and they work out an agreement that they will share those spaces. And sometimes their businesses are operating at different hours, and they bring evidence forward to show what the parking how heavy the parking would be during those different times, and to try and demonstrate that even though there's technically one space, if for all intents and purposes it ought to be counted twice, because it's going to be occupied by different businesses at different times when they're seeking a special exception. In this particular instance, reviewing the materials submitted by this particular applicant, I don't see that they're requesting shared space with any other local business or lot or anything like that. So I don't see, I would agree with Bart that I don't see an application in this particular instance.
Okay, I'll open it up to commissioners. Does anyone feel that this is applicable or relevant? And would you like to speak to the finding? Commissioner Kylie Miller.
Thanks. I think a lot of those, or at least several of those exceptions that we're giving for multifamily apartments in the past that aren't listed when we started, the Light Horse, the Mosaic, you know, they benefited from having those parking structures adjacent to them. And so we don't have that in this situation. Or, you know, the Ruckus had the parking right across the street from them, as did Ascension had spaces. So we don't really have an opportunity for shared parking here unless the village can buy that dry cleaning space and put up a parking structure there. With the loss of those parking spaces, I don't know how many you said parked in that bank parking lot in the past. You know, all those cars also are having to scramble to figure out where to park. So it's unfortunate, but we don't have that. This property does not have a public lot, whether surface lot or structure that they can take advantage of. So that's a negative.
Other commissioners? As counterpoint, Commissioner Kylie Miller, you know, the Oaks has a parking exception that was an administrative grant, and they don't have any shared parking options, and it doesn't, you know, they're meeting that. They're not exceeding demand. So it's just something to keep in mind. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I can only say that I've read one anecdotal comment online that they are having a parking issue. They don't have enough parking, but you know, that's the only comment I've ever heard about the Oaks.
Right. I can't say that I've had a report or anything like that, but it is interesting that the business-wise that they thought that would work, and there is no lot around them. So it's just interesting that developments move ahead with a lower parking expectation. So factor 12, alternative transportation that has been reasonably shown to reduce the need for parking. Attorney Baer, Director Griepentraub, I think this is pretty straightforward, but just in case.
Yeah, I mean, again, I agree. It's relatively straightforward. Is there any evidence to suggest that, you know, that there is any type of public transport or alternative transport of any kind that would potentially alleviate the need in that particular area for individuals to, you know, need parking because they may not have vehicles or that kind of thing. So yeah, again, I would agree it's relatively straightforward.
All right, commissioners who would like to speak to this, Trustee Tammy Bockhorst.
Thank you, President McKeag. As someone who lived on Oakland Avenue and took the green line back then, it was a different number, I believe the 15 or the 10, I can't recall. There's also the red line. There is a bus stop right out front. So that runs rather frequently. And as one of the commissioners mentioned, is one of the highest usage bus routes. And I'm on it pretty often. And I see Director Griepentraub riding his bike pretty frequently to get to his job here too. But anyway, I digress. So yes, there are options. And hopefully we can bring Bubbler back as well, so that we will have increased multimodal opportunities. But they do exist. There's really no way to say that that doesn't exist.
Other commissioner comments? Barbara Kylie Miller.
Yeah, I think that works great if you work downtown and you work kind of standard hours. I worked downtown for most of my career and paid $120 to $140 a month for a parking space. A lot of people do not work downtown. They work in parts of Milwaukee where a bus line doesn't go, or they work in Waukesha, or they, you know, my husband worked in Illinois and Oshkosh for years. So, you know, it's difficult to make these decisions based on assumptions of, you know, one size fits all. You know, I'm sure there's lots of households, both currently and those that might move into the apartment, that whether you have children or whatever, when winter comes, if I fit the income bracket of the potential renters, and I live on the east side of Shorewood, there's no way I'm walking or riding my bike over to Grafton Vessel or North Shore Boulangerie. I'm going to drive. So yes, we have a bus line, but that's pretty much it. And it, you know, it doesn't go everywhere. So, I mean, I don't think it's one of those things that's going to work for everybody. You know, if you're an attorney or some kind of professional, if you have to see clients during the day, maybe rent a court, you know, you're not going to hop on a bus. If you can afford luxury apartment rents, you know, you're going to have a car. And again, one size does not fit all. I understand that. Some people like to take public transportation, some people do not. So it just depends what your job is and where it is. And, you know, it's too bad that we don't live in a city with all the options that other cities have. That's just the way it is.
Commissioner Kudo?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the testimony of, I don't know if it's testimony or the comments from business owners earlier would suggest that this is going to be a real problem, that all of their folks typically drive, and that the parking is going to be a continued issue, and that they don't traditionally take in public transportation, whether it's a bicycle or a bus or whatever it happens to be. So for me, this is an issue.
Trustee Bockhorst, do you have something else to add?
I actually do. Thank you. So the bank that existed there forever, I believe a lot of people drove to and from that as well. But we're not asking, listen, plenty of professionals, myself included, take public transportation. Ask any New Yorker, and doesn't mean even if they live in the city or the 5 boroughs. But anyway, I don't think that kind of classist argument applies here. The fact there is, and you guys take the bus, if anyone's taken the bus to the airport, we know it runs down Oakland Avenue. But beyond that, and there are other routes and ride sharing, and our family at one point, 2 professionals in the family went a whole year without a car. We did that with a combination of other things, but yeah, sure, everyone has different mobility needs, and but we'll go back to the fact that in this luxury apartment situation, if someone needs a parking spot and they are willing to spend upwards of $2,000 to $3,000 a month, and this place doesn't provide it for them, I highly doubt they're going to move there, because they do have, as you probably do, Barbara Kylie Miller, plethora of other living opportunities and options. So it's, again, not, we can't assume that one size fits all, that everyone that's going to move into this apartment is going to, you know, go there. And hopefully they would understand how many parking spots are available to them, because I'm pretty sure they're going to read the lease or have their lawyers do that for them. Do I wish there were increased public transportation options in the whole county of Milwaukee? Absolutely. And one of the ways that, you know, all of us here, I would encourage every planning commissioner to get on the bus. I think you'll see how easy it is. And oftentimes it's quicker than when I have to drive downtown or drive down to the 3rd Ward or wherever, than finding parking, et cetera. I do happen to have a parking spot, but anyway, so there are a lot of environmentally minded individuals, but that's really not what we're being asked to look at right now. We're being asked to evaluate whether or not there are alternate modes of transportation beyond the car. And if you do not see that the green line goes up and down Oakland Avenue, then, you know, you can pull it up on your map right now online. So anyway, it does exist. It's kind of a futile argument that we're arguing a fact in this regard. But anyway.
Yeah, and the application includes all the varieties of multimodal and rideshare that's available. So other commissioner comments on this factor 12. I think it's pretty straightforward. All right, final factor 13, such other matters as the Plan Commission deems relevant and material. So I'm going to, with all due respect, Barbara Kiley Miller, you are, of course, welcome to repeat all the items under 13 that you've mentioned already tonight. But I also was listening, and, you know, it's not 100% necessary, but I don't want to limit. Any other commissioners that have any other matters deemed relevant? Okay, Barbara Kiley Miller.
Thank you. My two concerns are the impact on our surrounding businesses, small businesses, and we've heard from several of them, or by letter or oral comment, and the safety of the children walking to and from school at Lake Bluff. We've had several recent developments on Kensington and Oakland that were able to meet the 1.75 code. I know that, as Commissioner Wickland has says, this is the proposal that we have before us tonight. But as I've seen the Plan Commission of Milwaukee do, we have several options. We can say no, full stop. We can say no, great project, but not right for Shorewood. We can say, you know, we really like this project. We like the idea behind it. We like what it will bring to the village, but there's just not enough parking provided. So looking at those buildings, I looked at the Ravenna and the Cornerstone and did the math. How did they manage to get that 1.75 requirement met? And they provided additional parking for, you know, retail or restaurant customers. If we stick, I did the math for this project, if we stuck with the 1.75, those 43 units are going to require 76 spaces. If we work backwards and said, okay, they've got 44 spaces with 1.75 code, that means they can only put in 25 units. When I watched the village board meeting discussion about this, I did seem that there was some appetite for lowering it from 1.75, but not as far as 1. And apparently that's what you're going to discuss at a committee of the whole in the future, that there was some appetite for a compromise. And I did hear the 1.5 mentioned. So what does that math look like? If we start with 43 units with a parking code of 1.5, that means they need to provide 65 spaces, still 21 spaces short. We look at the 44 spaces they have and apply that 1.5 code, that means they could only put in 29 to 30 apartments. How they get to that number is really up to them. Maybe they build it 3 stories instead of 4. Maybe they switch some of those 1-bedroom apartments to 2 bedrooms. I don't know, but I think that there is a great appetite, not just on the village board, but within the village community to kind of meet each other on common ground. You know, so that we can have thoughtful development, beautiful development in the village that increases housing opportunities without putting an undue burden on our small business owners that have struggled the last 18 months, that need to draw a customer base from outside our village boundaries, whether it's North Shore, from Milwaukee, other communities. And, you know, we've heard this time and again, when it was about parklets, or, you know, where are their customers going to park? And, you know, they're elderly and they're not going to walk a couple blocks in the winter. So I would like us to have, in my personal opinion, I would like the developer to come back and see if they can adjust their proposal. And it's not out of line for us to ask them that. The City of Milwaukee Plan Commission does this a lot, whether something's too high or, you know, neighbors are protesting the traffic in their neighborhood or whatever the reason might be, that, you know, could we find a way to make this work, even if it's luxury apartments and not affordable housing? Could we find a way to make this work, to put the burden on the neighborhood, whether it's residential or commercial, make it a little bit, you know, more palatable, and, you know, to lower the the detrimental effects, if there are any. And that's what I would like to see. I would like to see some compromise with what the plan is that's presented to us. Because again, there's no guarantee that this code is going to get changed down the line by other official bodies. So that's what I would propose, that, you know, let's not think that yes or no are our only options. That's it.
Okay. That sounds completely reasonable. I'm concerned that you're putting out an option that's not really a viable option for this body to take action on, which could be misleading for the public. So could we have some, so a parking exception application is in front of us tonight. If there was a motion to propose what Commissioner Kylie Miller is proposing, is that within our jurisdiction this evening?
Are you asking me? Or is that a sort of a?
No, I need to know because it kind of, I wasn't expecting what you said. It didn't, for me, it doesn't apply to factor 13 or to the matter at hand.
Well, okay, so to a certain extent, you're right. I mean, you have a special, or you have a request for a special parking exception before this body tonight. So this body's options are to either grant that or to deny it. Now, there is though some discretion built into the ordinance, you know, where, for example, if an applicant was saying, well, the reason that you should grant me the special exception is because I have a shared parking lot agreement with the neighbor and our businesses run at different times and I've got access to eight spots over there. And you could say, well, the approval is contingent upon furnishing this body with a written agreement confirming what you're telling us. Or, you know, you could put some other reasonable strings on the granting of the special parking exception that are relevant to you know, the parking issue. You can't, you know, I think it's beyond the jurisdiction of this body to say, well, come back to us and with a new proposal of 20 apartments instead of 28 apartments. So, right. I mean, that's a different thing altogether. So to a certain extent, you're right. I mean, you're deciding whether to grant the special exception in front of you or not. And you can, you know, place reasonable strings to that along the lines that I've described, but there's, you know, I think dictating the elements of the design or how many units is a bridge too far.
Director Griepenschlag?
Yeah, I just wanted to read the code section specifically. So 53551D, the Plan Commission shall either approve or disapprove the application for a special exception hereunder in accordance with the provisions of this article, shall specify the requirement or requirements that will be expected from the application, and shall find that the special exception is not inconsistent with the application, with the applicable provisions herein. So that's specifically what the code says. The Plan Commission shall either approve or disapprove the application for a special exception hereunder. And if I'm interpreting that wrong, Nathan, feel free to weigh in on that. I just wanted to read what the code does say.
Yep, absolutely. You've hit it exactly on the head. And again, my interpretation is that the only strings you could attach if they were like along the example I gave, where you were asking for confirmation that a shared parking agreement that was represented to the body is indeed in place, and that, you know, that's being confirmed. You know, that would be, I think, within the jurisdiction of the body. But beyond that, that's exactly right.
Okay, and I guess I would just follow up, Commissioner Kylie Miller. I'm intrigued by that scenario that you presented, and so I would be interested to follow up on that because I'm not sure. Yeah, it would be really interesting to see how we might turn that into a practice. So what other, Commissioner Kylie Miller?
Yeah, I do have a motion to make, but I'm going to hold off until the other commissioners have a chance to raise any other matters that they deem relevant and material. But then I'll have a motion to make.
Any other commissioners? Wimmer Communities, did you want to speak?
I think our application speaks for itself. Our track record is such that we build successful projects because we deliver a product that meets a market need. And the data that we provided to you in terms of what the demographics are typical for this type of project, what the parking demand that's typical for this project, that was from specific case studies of our 4 or 5 most recent developments. And those developments are located on Greenfield Avenue and Moreland Road, Blue Mound Road and Moreland Road, Barker and Blue Mound Road, Appleton and Main Street in Menominee Falls. So you're talking about the question of whether we have enough parking. We just cited that that only 25 or something like that % have a second car. These are not urban areas. These are suburban areas that don't have the walkability to essential services that you have. It is a reflection of the change in how society interacts with its environment. And the reality is that there's more people working from home. There's smaller households in the homes. And this location, we don't think will be any different in terms of the demographics that it will attract. Frankly, we think that it will probably have the lowest amount of parking demand that we've ever experienced, particularly because there is walking to services, there's transportation, and there is just everything that points to something that we're changing. And zoning standards that made sense in 1960 just simply don't make sense today. And it's because society has changed and how we do business has changed, how we get our goods have changed. And to ignore that really will only result in a continued decline in the success of real estate projects that are built looking at codes and standards and methods of society interacting with each other that are 50 to 60 years antiquated from where we are today. So I think we're in the business of creating successful projects. Yes, somebody who comes to this project and they have 3 cars, they're not going to rent here. They have choice. And in this case, we believe that the market is sufficient, that we will be successful, and that the numbers of stalls will be consistent with those suburban projects that we built within the last couple of years. And we'll have the similar types of demographics. So having said that, I think that it's an informed decision that we bring to you that, again, if you look at the alternatives, we are the lowest impact, the highest benefit, and the reality is that even your future planning for the city recognizes, or for the village, recognizes that redevelopment will be more costly and ultimately will require for it to be more intensely developed than in the past. And we're certainly an example of that. And I think we are not asking for TIF money. We will not be asking for TIF money. We are not going to be playing a bait and switch game. We are coming forward with a market rent project that we are investing in as a family business. And what you see before you is what you will have if given the opportunity. We've waited 6 generations to come to Shorewood. We're going to do it right. So with that, we ask for your support in granting this request.
Trustee Bockhorst?
Thank you. I'd be remiss, and maybe you mentioned this already, President McKeag or Director Griepenthal, that our land use policies, even though we are technically by municipal standards a village, but our land use policies are directly in line with our partner to the south, which happens to be the largest city in the state of Wisconsin, that being Milwaukee. I also, a couple of other things, but I've heard a lot of things, and I get it. We've heard from some small business owners, but I'm pretty sure that adding 42 units, which is at least probably, fully rented 42 people at the minimum, with a fair amount of disposable income, who do not have to get into a car to drive to the local businesses that are right out front their door. I can't imagine that having a detrimental impact. So I kind of want to say that I'm going to push that to the side. Safety, one of the commissioners brought up safety. I work in the city of Milwaukee, and dilapidated vacant buildings are areas that often decrease safety. So having an active street, having people living there is an opportunity to increase nighttime, daytime, all safety. Yes, this will come before the village board again. Great, I can't wait. Not this particular thing. When I talk about this, our zoning code, our antiquated 1951 zoning code. I'm good, I'll hurry up. I
just stay focused on the parking exception, the application.
Okay, fine. So I hear completely focused, just going to our vision 2025. In 2025, which is coming up, we claim that Shore will be a vibrant urban community with safe, friendly neighborhoods, affordable, desirable housing options that attract diverse people of all ages and stages of life. So this parking exception, I believe, directly relates to that. Opportunities to work and grow small, successful profit and nonprofit businesses, attractive and thriving local services, retail and hospitality businesses, excellent schools and access to world-class centers and higher education, strong multimodal transportation infrastructure that meets transportation needs, a welcoming community embracing new people, innovative ideas, and engaging with others to continuously improve Shorewood and the Milwaukee metro area, and a healthy community with clean air, water, medical services, et cetera. So again, decreasing parking and increasing livability options does, in my opinion, do to a lot of these things. And an ecologically responsible community, right? With, again, if we're not focused on car culture, that is one of the many ways that we can be economic. They're a financially responsible community with suitable and well-maintained public buildings and infrastructure, strong property values. This is what, how many millions of dollars is this going to add to our tax base once completed? I forget, almost 10 million direct impact. So, and then a well-governed community with leaders and citizens who value broad civic participation, which we've seen tonight in many cases, and maintain a long-range disciplined view of the future. So do all those things. So yes, that does relate to the parking. I can't wait to take the vote on this. I know we passed on it 2 months ago. I think we probably all know where the wind is blowing, but I would be remiss if I did not bring up our whole Vision 2025 plan, which I believe the community has elected me 3 times in hotly contested races, and I've supported all of this each and every one of those times. So thank you.
I'm sorry, was there something else that you wanted to add? I didn't mean to just.
I'll wait till Barbara talks. I'm kidding. Now I'm done.
Other commissioners who would like to speak to this factor? Okay. So this concludes, we've gone through all the factors in the code section that's guiding us this evening. There are, at this time, if there are not final comments, the motion before us or that we are set here to approve or deny the request for a special exception for parking on this project. So are there any final comments? And if not, I would entertain a motion. Okay, Barbara, I know you said you had a motion. I just want to make sure there are no final comments. Commissioner Kudo?
Nope,
No,
I'm good.
okay. All right, Commissioner Kylie Miller.
I'm going to make a motion cognizant of the fact that this matter, this zoning code of 1.75 is going to be in front of our village board within the next month, that we postpone a vote until we know whether the board wants to stick with 1.75, lower it to 1.5, 1.25, or 0. Because that's my motion, that we postpone a vote, a decision on this until after the board has decided where they would like us to land.
I'll second that.
Is there a second? Okay, there's a motion on the floor by Commissioner Kylie Miller, second by Commissioner Kudo. Is there discussion? Trustee Bockhorst?
I would argue against that. The reason this is, I would say if this body had been interested in the past for the village board to weigh in on things, you would have punted to the village board. But beyond that, 5 of the 7 of us voted to reduce the parking variance from 1.75 to 1 and in the past. So I understand that's an elected body and perhaps you value the opinion of the village trustees over this commission. I don't. I think they're independent bodies. But anyway, so I'm going to vote no on deferring. We already deferred once. And we also don't know when the village board is going to take its after budget. So it's not necessarily in October when this will be taken up. It is after the budget cycle. And the budget cycle statutorily has a determining date of when it must be adopted, but there was not a specific date on that. And also, we are appointed as commissioners because we want to serve this village. And part of serving it is to make difficult decisions based on facts, information, input from the public, and input from our professional staff. And we deliberate and we work together as a team. We have questions, we ask them of ourselves, of the developers, of our planning directors, our village managers, and our other commissioners. So I feel that I've had enough, maybe because I have more experience, this maybe not, but I think that I value and respect that we all should be able to make decisions if we're serving on this commission and not punt them to another body. So that's my 17 cents. Thank you.
Commissioner Wickland, then Commissioner Kudo, then Commissioner Kylie Miller.
Yeah, I'll be quick. I just find this motion frustrating because we've gone through this before. We seem to do this a lot. We try to punt instead of making a decision. Our job is to make a decision. We punted last time and I actually agreed with Eric that I think it was great to get more public comment. I think that's important that the public be allowed to comment and be allowed to chime in, and there wasn't enough time last time. So I think it's really important we make a decision tonight.
Commissioner Kudo?
I think I probably have the longest history on this commission of frustration with the village board not taking this issue up. I've brought this up for years and years. The fact that we are now again being asked to make a parking special exception for development without the board taking this, in fact, with the board taking it up, but it failing the board, failing at the board level, this is just beyond frustrating. So in some ways I agree with Dan, but I just wish the board would get together and get this figured out so that this stops coming back to us time and time again. So yeah, I mean, I want this delayed because not anything to do with Wimmer. I have absolutely no problem with it, but just because I'm sick of the procedure. It's ridiculous at this point that we're still doing these for every single project. So, again, this has nothing to do with Wimmer. This has nothing to do with this commission, and it has everything to do with the village board's inability to address this issue once and for all.
Barbara Kiley Miller.
Thank you. I understand Commissioner Kudo's frustration, and I don't mind deferring this. I mean, heck, I think we took 5 meetings to talk about what's a porch, what's a patio, what should be in the front yard setback, and what shouldn't be. But I think we've heard from enough residents, both regarding the Capitol and Stoll project and this project, to get a sense of what the community wants. They want thoughtful development, attractive development, but they don't want more cars on the street. So, whether our code should be 1.75 or 1.0, I think most people would be happy if it fell somewhere in the middle, whatever that number might be. And so if the village board is going to address this in our near future, I think it's worthwhile for us to wait. We don't want people griping about, why did you approve this? This building's going up. We know it's going to be attractive, but there are a lot of concerns about what it does to surrounding neighborhoods, to businesses, and it's not going to hurt anything in the long run to establish what our zoning code is and have it be one that we can all buy into, whether we're a business owner, elected or appointed official, or a resident.
Mm-hmm. Commissioner Klein.
Sorry. I think my comment is along the line of Commissioner Wickland's. This proposal is in line with the number that we proposed to the board for changing the requirements. So I'm in favor of it and not interested in delaying the vote.
Yeah, I'll be voting no on this motion. And I think you've done a great job sounding like there's another way, but if the village board votes 1-1, then this project moves forward. If the village board arrives at a compromise, whatever that is, then they'll be back with another special exception. So I am ready to take a vote on this. So I would like a roll call vote on the motion. Let's read the motion back. We have a motion by Kiley Miller, seconded by Kudo. The motion is to defer. You want to read it?
Yeah, the motion was to postpone the vote until the village board could decide on the code change, the ratio change. Correct? Okay. All right. So a roll call vote on that. Dan Wickland.
No.
Josh Pollock.
No.
Therese Klein.
No.
Barbara Kiley Miller.
Yes.
Eric Kudo.
Yes.
Trustee Bockhorst.
No.
President McKeag.
No.
Okay. Motion fails 5-2.
I would entertain a motion at this time.
I can.
Okay.
I move to approve the parking special exception for proposed multifamily redevelopment at 4414 North Oakland Avenue submitted by Acquisition Entity 5 LLC based on meeting the conditions stated in 535-51B.
Second.
All right, motion by Commissioner Klein, seconded by Commissioner Pollock. Any discussion? Oh, Bart?
Thanks. Yeah, just based on reading what the code says, there was a section in there that I didn't have in my suggested motion. So it does say that the motion that the approval or disapproval shall specify the requirement or requirements that will be expected from the application. If it's possible to make a friendly amendment to that motion, just to clarify that your approval is for an exception to allow for 44 parking spaces, 14 of which would be not enclosed. I think that is the specification that has been requested, and I think that would help to clarify that the motion meets the requirements of the code.
Thank you,
I
Bart.
don't know, Nathan, if you agree with that or not, but that's how I understand that clause to read.
Attorney Baer?
Excuse me, I was trying, the mute button was stuck there. So yes, yes, Bart, I agree. Sorry, for some reason my mute button got stuck.
I missed that. Was that okay, Therese and Josh?
Yes.
Friendly amendment, has it been accepted?
Yeah.
Okay. Any other discussion? All right, seeing none, this will, if you could read back the motion and then do a roll call vote, please.
All right, so Therese moved to approve the parking special exception for proposed multifamily redevelopment at 4414 North Oakland Avenue, submitted by Acquisition Equity 5 LLC, based on meeting the conditions stated in 535-51B, with 44 spaces on site and 14 of those spaces not enclosed.
Okay. Roll call vote, please.
All right. Barbara Kylie Miller?
No.
Therese Klein?
Yes.
Eric Kudo?
No.
Josh Pollock?
Yes.
Trustee Bockhorst?
Yes.
Dan Wickland?
Yes.
And President McKay?
Yes.
Motion passes 5-2.
Okay. I believe, thank you everyone for your time, talent, and service and patience this evening. I believe there's just motion to adjourn is the last item on our agenda. My screen went to sleep.
We do have future agenda items, agenda sized.
Yes. So future agenda items?
I can tell you for reference, we do have 2 applications in for conditional use permits for the October Plan Commission meeting. So we will be having a meeting in October to discuss those. There is a slight potential for a 3rd application to come in, but tomorrow is the deadline for that. So there will be 2 conditional use permits on the October agenda.
Thank you for that update.
Bart, tell me that they're not about parking.
They are not.
Thank you.
All right, is there a motion to adjourn?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn by Barbara Kylie Miller. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Commissioner Pollock. All those in favor, show of hands, aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Eric?
Co-opposed.
Oh, okay.
You are opposed?
No.
Oh, okay. So it seems like a unanimous vote for adjournment this evening at 9:49.
Can agree on something. Let's get out of
Can we
here.
vote,
Woo!
can we vote to have a drink now?
And didn't even wait. I'll see you guys later.
All right.
Bye.